Two trucks having sex. Two trucks having sex. My muscles, involuntarily flex. Two trucks having sex. Two trucks having sex. My muscles, involuntarily flex. Two pickup trucks making love, American made. Built for tough, too beautiful. Murder machines, American angels in the sky. Groan and cry. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. My muscles, involuntarily flex. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. My muscles, involuntarily flex. Right by my side, there's easy talk and Robert Zadar. From Maniac Cop 1, 2, and 3. This barbecue could bring you to your knees. And so cool these two trucks. Two trucks holding hands. Two trucks holding hands. The passion is more than I can withstand. Two trucks holding hands. Two trucks holding hands. The passion, my big fat heart expands. Two pickup trucks, one cylinder block, crush my body like a rock so beautiful. Let's start tonight, just fireworks and eagles in the sky. The founding fathers cry. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. Two trucks having sex. Oh yes. My muscles, involuntarily flex.
You all thought I'd quit. You all thought the day had came that I am no longer streaming. I'm back. I have no idea if this music is way too loud for my speech. I am waiting for the... what's it called? You know what I mean. The stream delay to catch up on my phone. But hello, I am here. Oh my god, I'm gonna regret this stream after I've done it. One moment. Oh god, it's too loud. Two trucks, what are you doing here? Stop that. No, I didn't know it would be this loud. I'm fuming. Is that better? Oh, fuck it, it's going all the way down. There you go. Right. Now that I know that it's not too loud, I'm going to turn it a little bit down in my ear. Not for you, though. I have just a bit, because I've realised that I made a rookie streaming mistake. I did not realise that desktop sound was the same as my microphone. It did not look the same, but it said it was the same, therefore it's the same. But basically, I'm here. Why was I gone for so long? I said I'd be gone for like 2 weeks for exams, then I'd be straight back. It's probably been about a month. Maybe a month? I know it's been a little bit less than a month, but you get the point. I keep on saying I was going to come back, and then suddenly a week passed, and suddenly another week passed, and then suddenly a few more weeks passed. But here we are. Exams lasted 2 weeks, that's fair enough. I planned on having a 2-week break just for exams. Then I had a week off from school, to which I had planned literally every day of the week off. Who would have thought streamer has social... Like, not every day. I think there were like 2 days that I didn't. But who would have thought streamer has social life? I know, it's a feat, it's insane, but I actually managed it. But yeah, I like left the house at like 8, 9 o'clock each day, and then got home at like 7, 8 o'clock each day. Basically out for about 12 hours. Therefore, like, I had neither the time nor energy to do anything when I got... do anything streaming wise when I got back, even though I distinctly remember last time I was streamed saying that I wanted to do smaller bit of streams so I could actually stream more frequently, even though they weren't like hours long, and I disobeyed my own rules almost immediately. But yes, I have had exams and I was motivated to stream again weirdly enough, because I got my mock results for these exams, which these 2-week exams weren't real exams, they were like prelims, mocks, if you will, fake exams, to prepare me for the real ones. I got those on Wednesday, today's Friday, but that almost motivated me to stream, because I saw my results and I wasn't happy with them. Specifically English literature, purely because during the exam I was in a really shit mood on the morning, like absolutely horrendous. Like I couldn't even. It took like the will of the gods for us to be able to pick up my pen, and there were 2 questions each. I had like an hour something to answer, and because the idea was you had an hour and like I think it was 15 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes to answer the first question. You got your paper taken off. You got under the paper, an hour 15 to answer the second question. One was on Macbeth, one was on Jekyll and Hyde, I believe. Yeah, because it was the first exam, so like I don't really remember what the contents actually were. But I think I answered like a bit on the first question, and then I just couldn't anymore. And then for the second question, I must have wrote about a sentence before I just put my head down on a desk and just like couldn't. I have no idea what came over us. I've never had, like, obviously I have had stuff like that before, but like, not during an exam. Usually exams give me the motivation to actually keep writing, therefore I actually get good grades. When I usually do get good grades, but just, I don't know, just for this one, I just absolutely couldn't physically bring myself to do it, even though the questions were easy. The questions were really easy. The first one was about Lady Macbeth, I think, and I think the Jekyll and Hyde one was about the weather in the story. The fucking weather, it's a gothic novel. The weather's like the whole thing. It's dark, it's gloomy, it's a bit, I don't know, wet sometimes. And it's also Victorian and it's gothic. It could not lay it out more easier for you, but I just physically couldn't bring myself to write anything. So I got a pretty, like, subpar grade. And I'm not happy with it. So I want to be able to be more confident with literature, even though I knew how to answer the questions. Therefore, I bought a book from Waterstones the other day, which is the entirety of Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I'll admit it's not a long book. It's a novella. It's made to be like a pretty like short, snappy book. Gets to the point. Like there's no red herrings, I believe. It's all like meant to be there. It's very good literature as well. And I googled it, and apparently it takes about like a little under 2 hours to read. Obviously, I'm going to be reading it out loud, therefore it will take me a little bit longer. But I'm going to read the entire book because, truth be told, I haven't read this book before. Which is weird, right? I think I've missed about... Wait, okay, I have read this book in class. But I was off for like a day, and I missed 2 chapters. And this book is 10 chapters long, so that's like a fifth of the book that I missed by accident. And I just never caught up on it, because I had no idea which chapters I've really missed. And I didn't really understand what was going on. So I've bought the book like a couple weeks ago, and I'm actually going to read it. Straight up. The entire thing, no meme. And I'm gonna put, I've like prepared like better music and that for the background, I promise. We're not just gonna be, but I've got so I've got the book in hand right here, but I've also found like a really, I'll admit, a very, it looks gross. It just looks like a PDF copy and paste, right, on Google. But it's the entire book, so you can like read along, I guess, if you really want to. If there's anyone actually here. To be fair, most people, if anyone's gotten the notification for this, they probably just think I'm playing Valorant anyway. I'm not. I'm being educational. Whoever said you don't learn anything on this channel, honestly. But yeah, I have no more stolen to do. I don't know. I downed like a caramel macchiato. I don't know. Macchiato right before the stream. Pretty good if you want to. But I want to stream again. But I want to make something of my streams. I want to do things other than just sit down, play Valorant, rage, talk about very complicated ideas I don't really understand at the end of the streams, realise that I only talk about it because I'm getting bored, and then end. That's not what I want to make of my streams, because they very clearly aren't doing very well, therefore I'm very clearly doing something wrong. You know how it is. But that's it. I'm trying to think of other things to say, but honestly I don't have anything. I guess I used my time wisely that I've been away. I did actually do things that was worth my time, more or less. Here we are. Ooh, that needs to be turned up a little bit. It's jumping all over. I'm looking at it on OBS. It's going for the very bottom of the sound register, like nearly the top. I have no idea what to make of this audio. I'll leave it there and jump up and down how it pleases. But without further ado, that is not the right thing. That's also not the right thing. There we are. Oh, I forgot I'm on where are we? I need to put on can I do game capture with Google? No, it won't let us for some reason. It'll let us game capture Valorant and Spotify and nothing else. I don't have Valorant open at the moment. Whatever, I'm just gonna do display capture. It's the same thing. But yes, here is chapter 1 of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I'll actually be reading from my book, because this looks horrible to read from. So, I do have it, if you think I'm capping. I do actually have it. But this looks a bit grim to read from, and I feel like I'll lose my place immediately. I'll remember to scroll once I get the bit about a check being genuine, apparently. No more stalling. I've got my drink, sat down, I've got a blanket, and I've got the music. I'm gonna quickly check audio. I know I just said everyone's good at stall, but... Oh, you can vaguely hear the sad piano in the background. I'll turn it up a... OBS, don't let me down. Yes, you get why I'm a little bit thingy about the audio, because it's going up and down all over the place. I'll put you there. Sure. I'm only reading a book, and there's only gonna be like probably like one person coming in and out every now and then. I don't really care. Fine. Anyway, now there's no more stalling. This is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, Chapter 1. Story of the Door. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged... Oh, fuck, I don't know what that word is already. This is going to be a long 2 hours. Nah, we'll start again, we don't need that. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beaconed from his eyes, something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in these silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the act of his life. I don't know what that word is either. He was austere with himself. Drink gin when he was alone to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the doors for one for 20 years. But he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering almost with envy at the high pressure of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in an extremity inclines to help rather than to reprove. I inclined to Cain's heresy, they used to say gluntly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In this character, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of downgoing men. And to such of these, so long as they came about his chambers, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanour. No doubt the feat was easy to Mr. Utterson, for he was undemonstrative. If you're wondering, in the book, it has like a dash where the line ends mid-line as to make the book more aesthetically pleasing, and it didn't register for a second. He was undemonstrative. Undemonstrative. That doesn't sound like a real word, at the best. And even his friendships seemed to be founded in a similar catholicity of good nature. That's like Catholicism, basically. It is the mark of a modest man to accept his friendly circle ready-made from the hands of opportunity, and that was the lawyer's way. His friends were those of his own blood, or those whom he had known the longest. His affections, like ivy, were the growth of time. They implied no aptness in the object. Hence, no doubt, the bonds that united him to Mr. Richard Enfield, his distant kinsman, the well-known man about town. It was a nut to crack for many, what these two could see in each other, or what subjects they could find in common. It was reported by those who encountered them in their Sunday walks, that they said nothing, looked singularly dull, and would hail with obvious relief the appearance of a friend. For all that, the two men put the greatest store by these excursions, counted them the chief jewel of each week, and not only set aside occasions of pleasure, but even resisted the call of business, that they might enjoy them uninterrupted. It chanced on one of these rambles that their way led them down a by-street in a busy quarter of London. The street was small and what is called quiet, but it drove a thriving trade on the weekends. The inhabitants were all doing well, it seemed, and all emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their gains in coquetry, so that the shop front front stood along the... Mate, I'm not good at English. Along that thoroughfare with an air of invitation, like rows of smiling saleswomen, even on Sunday when it veiled its more florid charms and lay comparatively empty of passage. The street shone out in contrast to its dingy neighbourhood, like a fire in a forest, and with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught and pleased the eye of a passenger. 2 doors from one corner, one left hand going east, the line was broken by the entry of the court, and just at that point, a certain sinister block of building thrust forward its gable on the street. It was 2-story high, showed no window, nothing but a door on the lower story, and a blind forehead of discoloured wall on the upper, and bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. Tramps slouched in the recess and struck matches on the panels. Children kept shop upon the steps. The schoolboy had tried his knife on the mouldings, and for close on a generation, no one had appeared to drive away these random visitors or to repair their ravages. I'm trying to think of where I'm up to on the PDF, because I'm not reading from this. I'm up to here. Right, I'm just making sure I don't read past, like, what's actually visible. For Enfield and the lawyer were on the other side of the by-street, but when they came abreast of the entry, the former lifted up his cane and pointed. "Did you ever remark that door?" he asked, and when his companion had replied in the affirmative, "It is connected in my mind," he added. "A very odd story." "Indeed," said Mr. Urson, with a slight change of voice. "And what was that?" "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world at 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, and my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps, street after street, and all the folks asleep, street after street, all lighted up as if for procession, and all as empty as a church. Till at last I got into that state of mind when a man listens and begins to long for the sight of a policeman. All at once I saw 2 figures, one of a little man who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and either of a girl, maybe 8 or 10, who was running as hard as she was able down a cross street. Ooh, I know what this is. Well, sir, the 2 ran into one another naturally enough at the corner, and in came the horrible part of the thing, for the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It was nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It was like a man. It was like some damned juggernaut. I gave a view, halloa, took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group about the screaming child. He was perfectly cool and made no resistance, but gave me one look, so ugly that it brought out the sweat on me like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor, for whom she had been sent, put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much the worse, more frightened according to the sawbones, and there you might have supposed would be an end to it. But there was one curious circumstance. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight, so had the child's family, which was only natural, but the doctor's case was what struck me. He was usual cut-and-dry hypocrisy, of no particular age and colour, with a strong Edinburgh accent, and about as emotional as a bagpipe. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us. Oh, I've scrolled by accident. Whoops. Every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw that Sawbones turned sick and white with the desire to kill. I know what was in his mind, just as he knew what was in mine, and the killing being out of the question, we did the next best. We told the man we could and would make such a scandal out of this, as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we undertook that he should lose them. And all the time, as we were pitching it in red hot, we were keeping the women off him as best we could, for they were wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces. There was a man in the middle, with a kind of black, sneering coolness. Frightened, too, I could see that, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. If you choose to make capital out of this accident, said he, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene, says he. Name your figure. Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. He would have clearly liked to stick out, but there was something about the lot of us that meant mischief, and alas he struck. The next thing was to get the money, and where do you think he carried us but to a place with the door? To that place with the door. Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with the matter of £10 in gold and a cheque for the balance of on counts. I'm assuming currency. Drawn payable to bearer and signed with the name that I can't mention, though it's one of the points of my story, but it was a name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that. If it was only genuine, I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman that the whole business looked apocryphal, and that a man does not, in real life, walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out with another man's cheque for close upon £100. But he was quite easy in sneering. Set your mind at rest, says he. I will stay with you till the bank's open and cash the cheque myself. So we all set off, the doctor and the child's father, and our friend and myself, and passed the rest of the night in my chambers. The next day, when we had breakfasted, right, when it went in a body to the bank and gave in the cheque myself, and said I had every reason to believe it was forgery. Not a bit of it. The cheque was genuine. Well, yes, I can fit the rest of the chapter all in. Tut tut, said Mr. Utterson. I see you feel as I do, said Mr. Enfield. Yes, it's a bad story, for my man was a fellow that nobody could have to do with, a really damnable man, and the person that drew the cheque is the very pink of the proprieties, celebrated too, and what makes it worse, one of your fellows who do what they call good, blackmail, I suppose, an honest man paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth. Blackmail House is what I call that place with the door. In consequence, though even that, you know, is far from explaining all, he added, and with the words fell into a vein of musing. From this he was recalled by Mr. Utterson, asking rather suddenly, and you don't know if the drawer of the cheque lives there? A likely place, isn't it? Returned Mr. Enfield, but I happen to have noticed his address. He lives in some square or other. And you never asked about the place with the door? Said Mr. Utterson. No, sir, I had a delicacy, was the reply. I feel very strongly about putting questions. It partakes too much of the style of the day. Of judgment. You start a question, and it's like starting a stone. You sit quietly on the top of a hill, and know where the stone goes, starting others. And presently some bland old bird, the last you would have thought of, is knocked on the head in his own back garden, and the family have to change their name. No, sir, I make it a rule of mine. The more it looks like Queer Street, the less I ask. I don't remember this bit. Fair enough. Very good rule, too, said the lawyer. But I have studied the place for myself, continued Mr. Enfield. It seems scarcely a house. There is no other door, and nobody goes in or out of that one but, once in a great while, the gentleman of my adventure. There are 3 windows looking on the court on the first floor, none below. The windows are always shut, but they are clean. And then there is a chimney which is generally smoking, so somebody must live there. And yet it's not so sure. The buildings are so packed together about that court that it's hard to say where one ends and another begins. The pair walked on again for a while in silence, and then Enfield, said Mr. Utterson. That's a good rule of yours. Yes, I think it is, returned Enfield. And for all that, continued the lawyer, there is one point I want to ask. I want to ask the name of that man who walked over the child. Well, said Mr. Enfield, I can't see what harm it would do. It was a man of the name of Hyde. Said Mr. Utterson. What sort of man is he to see? He is not easy to describe. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He's an extraordinary looking man, and yet I really And yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir. I can make it no hand of it. I can't describe him. And it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment. Mr. Utterson again walked some way in silence and obviously under a weight of consideration. You are sure he used a key? He inquired at last. My dear sir, began Enfield, surprised out of himself. Yes, I know, said Utterson. I know it must seem strange. The fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, is it because I know it already? You see, Richard. Ooh, Richard? You see, Richard, your tale has gone home. If you have been inexact on my point, you had better correct it. I think you might have warned me, returned the other with a touch of sullenness, but I have been pedantically exact, as you call it. The fellow had a key, and what's more, he has it still. I saw him use it not a week ago. Mr. Utterson sighed deeply, but said never a word, and the young man presently resumed. Here is another lesson to say nothing, said he. I am ashamed of my long tongue. Let us make a bargain never to refer to this again. With all my heart, said the lawyer. I shake hands on that, Richard. That is chapter 1. I'm starting to regret not paying as much attention in class. This is really interesting. My god, this chapter is long compared to the second one. Alright, let's just get on with it. And this one ends at, what's really the entry? I'll keep the title. It's about that chapter. It's after his Mr. Hyde, Mr. Seek joke. I'll remember that. How could I forget? That evening, Mr. Utterson came home to his bachelor house in sombre spirits and sat down to dinner without relish. It was his custom of a Sunday, when his meal was over, to sit close by the fire, a volume of some dry divinity on his reading desk, until the clock of the neighbouring church rang out of the hour of 12, and he would go soberly and gratefully to bed. On this night, however, as soon as the cloth was taken away, he took up a candle and went into his business room. There he opened his safe, took from the most private part of it a document endorsed on the envelope as Dr. Jekyll's will, and sat down with a clouded brow to study its contents. The will was holograph, for Mr. Utterson, though he took charge of it now that it was made, had refused to lend the least assistance in making of it. It provided not only that, in case of the deceased of Henry Jekyll, M.D., D.C.L., L.L.D., F.R.S., etc., all his possessions were to pass into the hands of his friend and benefactor All his possessions were to pass into the hands of his friend and benefactor Edward Hyde, but that in the case of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance or unexplained absence for any period exceeding 3 calendar months, the said Edward Hyde should step into the said Henry Jekyll's shoes without further delay and free from any burden or obligation, beyond the payment of a few small sums to the members of the doctor's household. This document had long been the lawyer's eyesore. It offended him both as a lawyer and as a lover of the sane and customary sides of life, to whom the fanciful was the immodest. And hitherto, that's definitely not how you pronounce that. And hitherto it was his ignorance of Mr. Hyde that had quelled his indignation, and now by sudden turn it was his knowledge. It was already bad enough when the name was but a name of which he could learn no more. It was worse when it began to be clothed upon with detestable attributes, and out of the shifting, insubstantial mists that had so long baffled his eyes, there leaped up the sudden, definite presentment of a friend. I thought it was madness, he said, as he replaced the obnoxious paper in the safe, and I begin to fear it is disgrace. With that he blew out his candle, and put on a great coat and set forth in the direction of Cavendish Square, that citadel of medicine where his friend, the great Dr. Lanyon, had his house and received his crowding patients. If anyone knows, it will be Lanyon, he said. He had thought. The solemn butler knew and welcomed him, who was susceptible to no stage of delay, but ushered direct from the door to the dining room, where Dr. Lanyon sat alone over his wine. This was Hartley, healthy, dapper, red-faced gentleman, the shock of hair prematurely white, in a boisterous, undecided manner. At sight of Mr. Utterson, he sprang up from his chair and welcomed him with both hands. The geniality was, as was the way of the man, was somewhat theatrical to the eye, but it reposed on a genuine feeling. for these two were old friends, old mates both at school and college, both thorough respecters of themselves and of each other, and, what does not always follow, men who thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. After a little rambling talk, the lawyer led up the subject which so disagreeably preoccupied his mind. "I suppose, Lanyon," said he, "you and I must be the two oldest friends that Henry Jekyll has." "I wish the friends were younger," chuckled Dr. Lanyon, "but I suppose we are, and what of that? I see little of him now." "Indeed," said Mr. Utterson. "I thought you had a bond of common interest." "We had," was the reply, "but it is more than 10 years since Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He began to go wrong in mind, and though, of course, I continue to take an interest in him for old sake's sake, as they say, I see, and I have seen devilish little of the man. Such unscientific balderdash," added the doctor, flushing suddenly purple, "would have a strange daemon and Pythias." This little spirit of temper was somewhat of a relief to Mr. Utterson. They have only differed on some point of science, he thought, and being a man of no scientific passions except in the matter of conveyancing, he even added, "it is nothing worse than that." He gave his friend a few seconds to recover his composure, and then approached the question he had come to put. "Did you ever come across a protege of his? One Hyde?" he asked. "Hyde," replaced Lanyon. "No, never heard of him, since my time." That was the amount of information that the lawyer carried back and with him to the great dark bed on which he tossed to and fro, until the small hours of the morning began to grow large. It was a night of little ease to his toiling mind, toiling in mere darkness and besieged by questions. 6 o'clock struck on the bells of the church that was so conveniently near to Mr. Utson's dwelling, and still he was digging at the problem. Hitherto, it had touched him on the intellectual side alone, but now his imagination also was engaged, or rather enslaved, as they lay and tossed in the gross darkness of the night and the curtained room. Mr. Enfield's tale went by before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. He would be aware of the great field of lamps of a nocturnal city, then of the figure of a man walking swiftly, then of a child running from the doctors, and then these men, and then these met, and the human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of her screams. Or else he would see a room in a rich house, where his friends lay asleep, dreaming and smiling at his dreams, and then the door of that room would be opened, the curtains of the bed plucked apart, sleeper recalled, and lo, there would stand by his side a figure to whom power was given, and even at that dead hour he must rise and do its biddings. The figure in these two phases haunted the lawyer all night, and if at any time he dozed over, it was but to see it glide more stealthily through sleeping houses, or move more swiftly, and still the more swiftly, even to dizziness, through wider labyrinths of lamplighted city, and at every street corner rushed a child and leave her screaming, and still the figure had no face by which he might know it. Even his dreams, it had no face, or one that baffled him and melted before his eyes, and thus it was that these sprang up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind, and singularly strong, almost an inordinate curiosity to behold the features of the real Mr. Hyde. If he could but once set eyes on him, he thought the mystery would lighten and perhaps roll altogether away, as was the habit of mysterious things when well examined. He might see a reason for his friend's strange preference or bondage, call it which he pleased, and even for the startling clauses of the will, at least it would be a face worth seeing. The face of a man who was without bowels of mercy, a face which had but to show itself to raise up, in the mind of the unimpressionable Enfield, a spirit of enduring hatred. From that time forward, Mr. Utterson began to haunt the house in the by-street of shops, in the morning before office hours, at noon when business was plenty and time scarce, at night under the face of the fogged city moon, by all lights and at all hours of solitude or concourse, the lawyer was to be found on his chosen post. I'll scroll it down now so I don't have to do it later. Oh god, this is quite a long paragraph. Quite a long chapter. Yeah. Should be a good spot. I'll have some more before I clock out. If If he be Mr. Hyde, he had thought, I shall be Mr. Seek. And at last his patience was rewarded. It was a fine, dry night, frost in the air, the street as clean as a ballroom floor, the lamps unshaken by any wind, drawing a regular pattern of light and shadow. By 10 o'clock, when the shops were closed, the by-street was very solitary and, in spite of the low growl of London from all round, very silent. Small sounds carried far. Domestic sounds out of the houses were clearly audible on either side of the roadway, and the rumour of the approach of any passenger preceded him by a long time. Mr. Utterson had been some minutes at his post when he was aware of an odd, light footstep drawing near. In the course of his nightly patrols, he had long grown accustomed to the quaint effect with which the footfalls of a single person, who is still a great way off, suddenly spring out distinct from the vast hum and clatter of the city. Yet his attention had never before been so sharply and decisively arrested, and it was with a strong, superstitious prevision of success that he withdrew into the entry of the court. The steps drew swiftly nearer, and swelled out suddenly louder as they turned at the end of the street. The lawyer, looking forth from the entry, could soon see what manner of man he had to deal with. He was small and very plainly dressed, and the look of him, even at the distance, went somehow strongly against the watcher's inclination, but he made straight for the door, crossing the roadway to save time, and as he came, he drew a key from his pocket, like one approaching home. Mr. Utterson stepped out and touched him on the shoulder as he passed. Mr. Hyde, I think? Mr. Hyde shrank back with a hissing intake of breath, as his fear was not only momentary, and though he did not look the lawyer in the face, he answered coolly enough, That is my name, you want. I see you are going in, returned the lawyer. I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard my name, and meeting you so conveniently, I thought you might admit me. You will not find Dr. Jekyll. He is from home, replied Mr. Hyde, blowing in the key, and then suddenly, but still without looking up. How did you know me? He asked. On your side, said Mr. Utterson. Will you do me a favour? With pleasure, replied the other. What shall it be? Will you let me see your face? Asked the lawyer. Mr. Hyde appeared to hesitate, and then, as upon some sudden reflection, fronted about with an air of defiance, and the pair stared at each other pretty fixedly for a few seconds. Now I shall know you again, said Mr. Utterson. It may be useful. Yes, returned Mr. Hyde. It is as well we have met, and... That is French. That is not my language. Apropos? And, summit. You should have my address. And he gave a number of a street in Soho. Good God, thought Mr. Utterson. Can he too have been thinking of the will? But he kept his feelings to himself, and only grunted in acknowledgement of this address. And now, said the other, how did you know me? By description, was the reply. Whose description? We have a common friend. We have common friends, said Mr. Utterson. Common friends? Echoed Mr. Hyde, a little hoarsely. Who are they? Jekyll, for instance, said the lawyer. He never told you, cried Mr. Hyde with a flush of anger. I do not think you would have lied. Come, said Mr. Utterson, that is not fitting language. The other snarled aloud into a savage laugh, and the next moment, with extraordinary quickness, he'd unlocked the door and disappeared into the house. The lawyer stood a while when Mr. Hyde had left him. A picture of disquietude, something like that. Then he began slowly to mount the street, pausing every step or two and putting his hand to his brow like a man in mental perplexity. The problem he was thus debating as he walked was one of a class that is rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish. He gave an impression of deformity without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing smile. He had borne himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness, and he spoke with a husky, whispering and somewhat broken voice. All these were points against him, but not all of these together could explain. I should probably Google that word. Hitherto unknown disgust, loathing and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him. There must be something else, said the perplexed gentleman. There is something more. If I could find a name for it, God bless me, the man seems hardly human. Something... troglodytic, shall we say? Or can it be the old story of Dr. Fell, Or is it the mere radiance of a foul soul that thus transpires through and transfigures its clear continent? The last I think for all my poor old Harry Jekyll. If I ever read a Satan's signature upon a face, it is on that of your new friend. The only reason I stopped after that, oh my poor old Harry Jekyll, is because I had like double take because I thought I'd read it wrong, because I know he's called Henry. That's interesting, he's called him Harry for some reason. Whatever, I need to scroll down. We are up to... Around the corner from the by street there was a square of ancient handsome houses, now for the most part decayed from their high estate and let in flats and chambers to all sorts and conditions of men, map engravers, architects, shady lawyers, and the agents of obscure enterprises. One house, however, second from the corner, was still occupied entire, and at the door of this, which wore a great air of wealth and comfort, though it was now plunged in darkness except for the fanlight, Mr. Utterson stopped and knocked. A well-dressed elderly servant opened the door. "Is Dr. Jekyll at home, Poole?" asked the lawyer. "I will see, Mr. Utterson," said Poole, admitting the visitor as he spoke into a large, low-roofed, comfortable hall, paved with flags, warmed after the fashion of a country house and by a bright open fire and furnished with costly cabinets of oak. "We'll wait here by the fire, sir, or shall I give you a light in the dining room?" "Here, thank you," said the lawyer, and he drew near and leaned on the tall fender. This hall, in which he was now left alone, was a pet fancy of his friends, the doctors, and Utterson himself was wont to speak of it as the pleasantest room in London. But tonight there was a shudder in his blood. The face of Hyde sat heavy on his memory. He felt what was weareth him, a nausea, a distaste of life, and in the gloom of his spirit he seemed to read a menace in the flickering of the firelight, on the polished cabinet, and uneasy starting of the shadow on the roof. He was ashamed of his relief when Poole presently returned to announce that Dr. Jekyll was gone out. "I saw Mr. Hyde go in by the old dissecting room door, Poole," he said. "Is that right, when Dr. Jekyll is from home?" "Quite right, Mr. Utterson, sir," replied the servant. "Mr. Hyde has a key." "Your master seems to repose a great deal of trust in that young man, Poole," resumed the other musingly. "Yes, sir, he do indeed," said Poole. "We have all orders to obey him." "I do not think I have ever met Mr. Hyde," asked Utterson. "Oh dear, no, sir. He never dines here," replied the butler. "Indeed, we see very little of him on this side of the house. Mostly comes and goes by the laboratory." "Well, good night, Poole. Good night, Mr. Utterson." And the lawyer set out homeward with a very heavy heart. Poor Harry Jekyll. That's freaking us out a bit. I swear he's called Henry. Poor Harry Jekyll, he thought. My mind misgives me as he is in deep waters. He was wild when he was young, a long while ago to be sure, but in the law of God there is no statute of limitations. It must be that. The ghost of some old sin, the cancer of some concealed disgrace. Punishment coming. Paid Clordo? More French. Years after memory has forgotten and self-love condoned the fault. And a lawyer, scared by the thought, brooded a while on his own past, groping in all corners of memory, lest by chance some jack-in-the-box of an old iniquity should leap to light there. His past was fairly blameless. Few men could read the roars of their life with less apprehension. Yet he was humbled to the dust by the many ill things he had done, and raised up again into a sober and fearful gratitude by the many that had come so near to doing, yet avoided. And then by a return on his former subject, he conceived a spark of hope. This Master Hyde, if he were studied, thought he, must have secrets of his own, black streets by the look of him, secrets compared to which poor Jekyll's worst would be like sunshine. Things cannot continue as they are. It turns me cold to think of this creature stealing like a thief to Harry's bedside. Poor Harry, what a awakening, and the danger of it, for if this Hyde suspects existence of the will, he may grow impatient to inherit. I must put my shoulder to the wheel. If Jekyll will but let me, he added, if Jekyll will only let me. Once more he saw before his mind's eye, as clear as transparency, the strange clauses of the will. That's interesting. It's still freaking us out about how he's calling him Harry. I swear down he's called Henry. Suppose it could be the fact that he hasn't seen him in about 10 years. I don't know. I'm gonna Google how to pronounce that one word before we continue, because it keeps on coming up. So it's probably like Victorian, like regular words. Where is it? If I come across it again, I'll just stop and Google it, because I cannot find it again. This is a tiny chapter. Wow. This is just a conversation. Fair enough. I need to rest my voice. I need to save it for the reading. But this is chapter 3. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. A fortnight later, by excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. And Mr. Utterson so contrived that he remained behind after the others had departed. This was no new arrangement with a thing that had befallen many scores of time. Where Utterson was liked, he was liked well. Hosts loved to detail the dry lawyer. When the light-hearted and the loose-tongued had already their foot on the threshold, they liked to sit a while in his unobtrusive company, practising for solitude, sobering their minds in the man's rich silence after the expense and strain of gaiety. To this rule, Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and as he now sat on the opposite side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast perhaps, but every mark of capacity of kindness. You could see by his looks that he cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. "I have been wanting to speak to you, Jekyll," began the latter. "You know that will of yours." A close observer might have gathered that topic was distasteful, but the doctor carried it off gaily. "My poor Utterson," he said, "you are unfortunate in such a client. I never saw a man so distressed as you were by my will, unless it were that hide-bound pedant Lanyon, at what he called my scientific heresies. Oh, I know he's a good fellow. You needn't frown. An excellent fellow, and I always mean to see more of him. But a hide-bound pedant for all that. An ignorant, blatant pedant. I was never more disappointed in any man than Lanyon. You know I never approved of it," pursued Utterson ruthlessly, disregarding the fresh topic. "My will? Yes, certainly, I know that," said the doctor, a trifle sharply. "You have told me so." "Well, I tell you so again," continued the lawyer. "I have been learning something of young Hyde." The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. "I do not care to hear more," he said. "This is a matter I thought we had agreed to drop." "What I heard was abominable," said Utterson. "It can make no change. You do not understand my position," returned the doctor with a certain incoherency of manner. "I am painfully situated, Utterson. My position is a very strange one. It is one of those affairs that cannot be mended by talking." "Jekyll," said Utterson, "you know me. I am a man to be trusted. Make a clean breast of this in confidence. I make no doubt I can get it out of you." "My good Utterson," said the doctor, "this is very good of you. This is downright good of you, and I cannot find words to thank you in. But I believe you fully. I would trust you before any man alive, aye, before myself, if I could make the choice. But indeed it isn't what you fancy. It is not so bad as that, and just to put your good heart at rest, I will tell you one thing. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde. I give you my hand upon that, and I thank you again and again. I will just add one little word, Utterson, that I am sure you'll take in good part. This is a private matter, and I beg of you to let it sleep." Utterson reflected a little, looking in the fire. "I have no doubt you're perfectly right," he said at last, getting to his feet. "Well, but since we have touched upon this business, and for the last time, I hope," continued the doctor, "there is one point I should like you to understand. I have really a very great interest in poor Hyde. I know you have seen him, he told me so, and I fear he was rude, but I do sincerely take a very great interest in that young man, and if I am taken away, Utterson, I wish you to promise me that you will bear with him and get his rights for him. I think you would if you knew all, and it would be a weight off my mind if you would promise. I can't pretend that I shall ever like him, said the lawyer. I don't ask that, pleaded Jekyll, laying his hand on the other's arm. I only ask for justice. I only asked you to help him for my sake. When am I no longer here? Utterson heaved an irrepressible sigh. Well, he said, I promise. That was a tiny chapter. Oh, my throat's really starting to feel it now, honestly. This is quite a short chapter as well. The Carew murder case. Nearly a year later, in the month of October 18 something. London was startled by a crime of singular ferocity and rendered all the more notable by the high position of the victim. The details were few and startling. A maidservant living alone in a house not far from the river had gone upstairs to bed about 11. Although a fog rolled over the city in the small hours, the early part of the night was cloudless, and the lane, which the maid's windows overlooked, was brilliantly lit by the full moon. It seemed she was romantically given, for she sat down upon her box, which stood immediately under the window, and fell into a dream of musing. Never, she used to say, with streaming tears when she narrated that experience, never had she felt more at peace with all men, or thought more kindly of the world. And as she so sat, became aware of an aged and beautiful gentleman with white hair drawing near along the lane, and advancing to meet him. Another and very small gentleman, to whom at first she paid less attention. When he had come within speech, which was just under the maid's eyes, the older man bowed and accosted with the other with a very pretty manner of politeness. It did not seem as if the subject of his address were of great importance. Indeed, from his pointing, it sometimes appeared as if he were only inquiring his way, but the moon shone on his face as he spoke, and the girl was pleased to watch it. It seemed to breathe such an innocent and old-world kindness of disposition, yet with something high, too, as of a well-founded self-content. Presently her eye wandered to the other, and she was surprised to recognise in him a certain Mr. Hyde, who had once visited her master, and for whom she had conceived a dislike. He had in his hand a heavy cane with which he stood. He was trifling, but he answered never a word, and seemed to listen with an ill-contained impatience. And then all of a sudden, he broke out in a great flame of anger, stamping with his foot, brandishing the cane, and carrying on, as the maid described it, like a madman. The old gentleman took a step back, with the air of one very much surprised and a trifle hurt, and at that Mr. Hyde broke out of all bounds and clubbed him to the earth. The next moment, with ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim underfoot and hailing down a storm of blows under which the bones were audibly shattered and the body jumped upon the roadway. At the horror of these sights and sounds, the maid fainted. It was 2 o'clock when she came to herself and called for the police. The murderer was gone long ago, but there lay his victim in the middle of the lane, incredibly mangled. The stick with which the deed had been done, although it was some rare and very tough and heavy wood, had broken in the middle under the stress of this insensate cruelty, and one splintered half had rolled in the neighbouring gutter. The other, without doubt, had been carried away by the murderer. A purse and a gold watch were found upon the victim, but no cards or papers except a sealed and stamped envelope, which she had been probably carrying to the post, which bore the name and address of Mr. Utterson. This was brought to the lawyer the next morning before he was out of bed, and he had no sooner seen it and been told the circumstances than he shot out a solemn lip. I shall say nothing till I have seen the body, said he. This may be very serious. Have the kindness to wait, and while I dress. And with the same grave countenance, he hurried through his breakfast and drove to the police station, whither the body had been carried. As soon as he came into the cell, he nodded. Yes, said he. I recognise him. I am sorry to say that this is Sir Danvers Carew. Good God, sir, exclaimed an officer. Is it possible? The next moment his eye lighted up with professional ambition. This will make a deal of noise, he said, and perhaps you can help us to the man. and he briefly narrated what the mate had seen and showed the broken stick. Mr. Utterson had already quailed at the name of Hyde. When the stick was laid before him, he could doubt no longer. Broken and battered as it was, he recognised it for one that he had himself presented many years before to Henry Jekyll. "Is this Mr. Hyde, a person of small stature?" he inquired. "Particularly small and particularly wicked-looking, is what the mate calls himself," said the officer. Mr. Utterson reflected, and then, raising his head, "If you will come with me in my cab," he said, "I think I can take you to his house." It was by this time about 9 in the morning, and the first fog of the season. A great chocolate-coloured pall lowered over heaven, but the wind was continually charging and rooting these embattled vapours, so that as the cab crawled from street to street, Mr. Utterson behaved a marvellous number of degrees and hues of twilight. The hair would be dark and like the back end of evenings, and there would be a glow of a rich, lurid brown, like the light of some strange conflagration, and here, for a moment, the fog would be quite broken up, and a haggard shaft of daylight would glance in between the swirling wreaths. The dismal quarter of Soho, seen under these changing glimpses, and its muddy ways and slanting passages, and its lamps, which had never been extinguished or had been kindled afresh to combat this mournful reinvasion of darkness, seemed in the lawyer's eyes like a district of some city in a nightmare. Thoughts of his mind, besides, were of the gloomiest dye, and when he glanced at the companion of his drive, he was conscious of some touch of that terror of the law and the law's officers, which may at times assail the most honest. I'm just checking where I'm up to on the computer, so I know where to scroll. As the cab drew up before the address indicated, the fog lifted a little and showed him a dingy street, a gin palace, a low French eating house, a shop for the retail of penny numbers and twopenny salads, many ragged children huddled in the doorways, and many women of many different nationalities passing out, key in hand, to have a morning glass, and the next moment the fog settled down again upon that part, as brown as umber, and cut him off from his blackguardy surroundings. This was the home of Henry Jekyll, the man who was here, heir to £250,000 sterling. An ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. She had an evil face, smoothed by hypocrisy, but her manners were excellent. Yes, she was, yes, she said, this was Mr. Hyde's, but he was not at home. He had been in that night very late, but had gone away in less than an hour. There was nothing strange in that. His habits were very irregular, and he was often absent. For instance, it was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. "Very well, then. We wished to see his rooms," said the lawyer, and the woman began to declare it was impossible. "I'd better tell you who this person is," he added. "This is Inspector Newcomen of Scotland Yard." A flash of odious joy appeared upon the woman's face. "Ah," said she, "he is in trouble. What has he done?" Mr. Utterson. Just making sure. A flash of odious joy. Yeah, I've already said that. Mr. Utterson and the inspector exchanged glances. "You don't seem a very popular character," observed the latter. "And now, my good woman, just let me and this gentleman have a look about us." In the whole extent of the house, which, but for the old woman, remained otherwise empty, Mr. Hyde had only used a couple of rooms, but these were furnished with luxury and good taste. The closet was filled with wine, the plate was of silver, the napery elegant, a good picture hung upon the walls, a gift, as Urson supposed, from Henry Jekyll. He was much of a connoisseur, and the carpets were of many plies and agreeable in colour. At this moment, however, the rooms bore every mark of having been recently and hurriedly ransacked. Clothes lay about the floor, with their pockets inside out, lock-fast drawers stood open, and on the hearth there lay a pile of grey ashes, as though many papers had been burned. From these embers the inspector disinterred the butt end of a green chequebook, which had resisted the action of the fire. The other half of the stick was found behind the door, and this clinched his suspicion. The officer declared himself delighted. A visit to the bank, where several £1,000s were made to be lying to the murderer's credit, completed his gratification. Oh, not much to scroll, like 2 lines. You may depend upon it, sir, he told Mr. Utterson. I have him in my hand. He must have lost his head, or would he have never have left the stick, or, above all, burned the checkbook. Why, money's life to the man. We have nothing to do but wait for him at the bank and get out the handbills. This last, however, was not so easy of accomplishment. Mr. Hyde had numbered few familiars. Even the master of the servant maid had only seen him twice. His family could nowhere be traced. He had never been photographed, and the few who could describe him differed widely, as common observers will, only on one point, where they agreed, and that was the haunting sense of unexpressed deformity, which the fugitive impressed his pupils. Whew. Am I only on? Yeah, this is chapter 5. So, we're halfway through. I'm just stretching, because I have been hunched over my book for a little bit. See, this looks quite long, but it's mostly like speech anyway, so it probably will take the same amount of time to read this. Yeah, I think I actually flipped the page because I was looking at it and I realised there was no. I was about to start reading and I realised there was no like chapter title thing. So I'm just taking a break for a second because my voice is really starting to get it now, and we're nearly halfway there. But my back's killing as well. I'm not a big reader. I used to be when I was younger, but I really don't have the concentration to read anymore. Like, nor the patience, really. Considering, I suppose nowadays, like, books can take hours and hours to read, but movies are much short. Like, pretty much condense it all down to about an eighth of that. So I've got loads of books, but none of them are finished. How long have I been live? A moment. About a little over an hour. Because I would be more than happy to finish this book if it wasn't for the fact that my throat's really starting to feel it now. Like, you can probably tell when I'm reading it, I'm starting to get a little bit more hoarse. I can't really, I'm not too sure how audible it is. My throat's really starting to get it. Unless if I was to take, a break for, like, a couple of minutes, like, after this chapter, then finish the other half of the book. Because I'm nearly halfway there, really. I think I might do that, but, again, I need to save my voice. Incident of the letter. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Utterson found his way to Dr. Jekyll's door, where he was at once admitted by Poole and carried down by the kitchen officers and across a yard which had once been a garden to the building, which was indifferently known as the laboratory or the dissecting rooms. The doctor had bought the house from the heirs of a celebrated surgeon, and his own taste being rather chemical than anatomical, had changed his destination of the block at the bottom of the garden. It was the first time that the lord had been received in this part of the friend's quarters, and he eyed the dingy windowless structure with curiosity, and gazed round with a distasteful sense of strangeness as he crossed the theatre. Once crowded with eager students, and now lying gaunt in silence, the tables laden with chemical apparatus, the floor strewn with crates and littered with packing straw, and the light falling of dimly through the foggy cupola. At the further end, a flight of stairs mounted to a door covered with red baize, and through this, Mr. Utterson was at last received into a doctor's cabinet. It was a large room fitted with glass presses, furnished among other things with a cheval glass and a business table, and looking out upon the court by 3 dusty windows barred with iron. The fire burned in the grate. A lamp was set lighted on the chimney shelf, for even in the house the fog began to lie thickly, and there, close to the warmth, sat Dr. Jekyll, looking deadly sick. He did not rise to meet his visitor, but held out a cold hand and bade him welcome in a changed voice. And now, Mr. Utterson, as soon as Poole had left them, "You have heard the news." The doctor shuddered. They were crying it in the square, he said. I heard him in my dining room. One word, said the lawyer. Crewe is my client. So are you, and I want you to know what I am doing. You have not been mad enough to hide this fellow. Utterson, I swear to God, cried the doctor. I swear to God I will never set eyes on him again. I buy my honour to you that I am done with him in this world. It is all at an end, and indeed he does not want my help. You do not know him as I do. He is safe. He is quite safe. Mark my words, he will never be he will never more be heard of. The lawyer listened gloomily. He did not like his friend's feverish manner. You seem pretty sure of him, said he. And for your sake, I hope you may be right. If it came to a trial, your name might appear. I'm quite sure of him, replied Jekyll. I have grounds for certainty that I cannot share with anyone, but there is one thing on which you may advise me. I have received a letter, and I am at a loss whether I should show it to the police. I should like to leave it in your hands, Utterson. You will judge wisely, I am sure. I have so great a trust in you. You fear, I suppose, that it might lead to his detection? Asked the lawyer. No, said the other. I cannot say that I care what becomes of Hyde. I am quite done with him. I was thinking of my own character, which his hateful business has rather exposed. Mr. Utterson ruminated for a while. He was surprised at his friend's selfishness, and yet relieved by it. Well, he said. He said at last. Let me see the letter. The letter was written in an odd, upright hand and signed Edward Hyde, and it signified briefly enough what the writer's benefactor, Dr. Jekyll, whom he had so unworthily repaid for 1,000 generosities, need labour under no alarm for his safety, as he had means of escape on which he had placed a sure dependence. The lawyer liked this letter well enough. It put a better colour on the intimacy than he had looked for, and he blamed himself for some of his past suspicions. Have you the envelope? He asked. I burned it, replied Jekyll, before I thought what I was about. It bore no postmark. The note was handed in. Shall I keep this and sleep upon it? Said Utterson. I wish you to judge for me entirely, was the reply. I have lost confidence in myself. Well, I shall consider, returned the lawyer, and now one word. More. It was Hyde who, dictated the terms in your will that disappeared. Hey Doc, I can't stay, but it's good to know you still stream. Hello! I explained the whole thing with why I've been gone and why I want to stream again and what I'm currently doing at the moment at the very start of the stream. You'll be able to see that once I've finished up, which I will be soon, actually. But, hello, welcome, unknown. I haven't seen you in a while. Probably because you haven't seen me in a while, but you get the point. What was I up to? It was Hyde who dictated the terms in your will about the disappearance. The doctor seemed seized with a calm of faintness. He shut his mouth tight and nodded. I'm just looking at where I need to... scroll down a little bit. I knew it, said Utterson. He meant to murder you. You have had a fine escape. I have had what is far more to the purpose, returned the doctor solemnly. I have had a lesson, oh God, Utterson. What a lesson I have had. And he covered his face for a moment with his hands. On his way out, the lawyer stopped and had a word or two with Poole. By the by, said he, there was a letter handed in today. Was the messenger like? But Poole was positive nothing had come except by post, and only circulars by that, he added. This news sent off the visitor with his fears renewed. Plainly the letter had come by the laboratory door. Possibly, indeed, it had been written in the cabinet, and if that was so, it must be differently judged, and handled with the more caution. The newsboys, as he went, were crying themselves hoarse along the footways. Special edition, shocking murder of an MP. There was a funeral oration of one friend and client. He could not help a certain apprehension, lest the good name of another should be sucked down in the eddy of the scandal. It was, at least, a ticklish decision that he had to make, and self-reliant as he was by habit, he began to cherish a longing for advice. It was not to be had directly, but perhaps he thought it might be fished for. Who is Doctavia? It's me! I'm Doctavia. What do you mean, bro? I can't believe you. But hello. Nice to see there's a few familiar faces coming in. Welcome back. It's a shame though, because I am gonna finish up in like probably about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on how long it takes for us to read the end of this chapter, which is about a page and a half on for me. Or like about this much, yeah. because my voice is starting to get really hoarse and I don't want to blow it out completely. I'm either going to end up or I'm going to have a break for like 5 minutes, like play some music in the meantime and then come back once my voice is a little bit better. Because I'm currently reading The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you're wondering. But you can really tell that my voice is starting to go. Presently after, he sat on one side of his own hearth, with Mr. Guest, his head clerk upon the other, and midway between, at a nicely calculated distance from the fire, a bottle of a particular old wine that had long dwelt unsunned in the foundations of his house. The fog still slept on the wing above the drowned city, but the lamps glimmered like carbuncles, and through the muffle of smother of these falling clouds, the procession of the town's life was still rolling in through the great arteries. The sound as of a mighty wind, but the room was gay with firelight. Fair enough. In the bottle, the acids were long ago resolved. The imperial dye had softened with time, as the colour grows richer in stained windows, and the glow of hot autumn afternoons on hillside vineyards was ready to be set free to disperse the fogs of London. Insensibly the lawyer melted. There was no man from whom he kept few secrets than Mr. Guest, and he was not always sure he kept as many as he meant. Guest had often been on business to the doctors. He knew Poodle. He could scarce have failed to hear of Mr. Hyde's familiarity about the house. He might draw conclusions. Was it not as well, then, that he should see a letter which puts that mystery to rights? And above all, since Guest, being a great student of critic and handwriting, would consider the step natural and obliging, the clerk besides was a man of counsel. He would scarce read so strange a document without dropping a remark, and by that remark Mr. Utterson might shape his future course. This is a sad business about Sir Danvers, he said. Yes, sir, indeed. It has elicited a great deal of public feeling, returned Guest. The man, of course, was mad. I should like to hear your views on that, replied Utterson. I have a document here in his writing. It is between ourselves, for I scarce knew what to do about it. It's an ugly business at the best, but there it is, quite in your way, a murderer's autograph. Guest's eyes brightened as he sat down at once and studied it with passion. No, sir, he said, not mad, but it is an odd hand. And by all accounts a very odd writer, added the lawyer. Just then the servant entered with a note. Is that from Dr. Jekyll, sir? Inquired the clerk. I thought I knew the writing. Anything private, Mr. Utterson? Only an invitation to dinner. Why, do you want to see it? One moment, I thank you, sir. The clerk laid the 2 sheets of paper alongside and sedulously, something like that, compared their contents. Thank you, sir, he said at last, returning both. It's a very interesting autograph. There was a pause during which Mr. Utterson struggled with himself. Why did you compare them, Guest? He inquired suddenly. Well, sir, returned the clerk, there's a rather singular resemblance. The 2 hands are in many points identical, only differently sloped. Rather quaint, said Utterson. It is, as you say, rather quaint, returned Guest. I won't speak of this note, you know, said the master. No, sir, said the clerk. I understand. But no sooner was Utterson alone that night than he locked the note into his safe, where it reposed from that time forward. What, he thought, Henry Jekyll forged for a murderer, and his blood ran cold in his veins. Woo! Well, there we have the first 5 chapters of Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I don't have far left. I'm gonna take a break for a couple minutes, play some better more upbeat music during the break, and I'll come back and I'll see what my voice is like, because it's really starting to go, but I do want to finish it, sooner rather than later. And if I finish it today, then I know I've completely finished it, but if I don't finish it today, then at least I might be able to finish it tomorrow. Therefore... Oh wow, it's been like an hour or so. Anyway. Hello, Lemon Demon. Right. Don't hurt your voice too much. Oh no, I'm not. That's why I'm taking the break, because I don't want to hurt my voice too much. But yeah, I'll be right back shortly. I'll play a quick ad, have a quick break. Probably only a couple of minutes, I don't know. Go get yourselves a snack as well if you'd like, but I want to finish that book. It's very interesting. I really like it. I probably talk about it nearly every stream, but I've not like actually read it properly. I've only just analysed it. But yes, I'll be back soon. When soon is, I'm not too sure, but you know, it's soon.
Freedom and, of course, their product. When the logo's finished, then we will unveil it. 7 billion people, instantly enlightened. Everyone's rebranded. All the fighting's over. Say goodbye to conflict. That design's rejected. There's no longer language, only recognition. There's no longer country, only corporate colors. Color makes us hungry. Hunger makes us human. Everyone can see it. Everything's connected.
I've just had. Ooh, I still don't know if I'm gonna turn it down. There we go. I turned the music a little bit so you can actually hear the piano. But I think I'm gonna keep going because I've just had two teaspoons of honey, had a little bit of water, and I've brought a coffee with us, and my throat feels a lot better. And maybe it might have something to do with the volume I'm speaking at. Maybe being too loud for too long will eventually blow out my voice. But yeah, I think I'm gonna keep going because I feel as though I still have a little bit left in us. But thank you for being patient with me. That break was actually well needed, just like sit on my throat for a couple of minutes because, you know. Testing. Yeah, because I'm gonna try and talk like a little bit quieter. Wait, I have no idea how long that's actually gonna last, purely because I don't want to blow up my voice too much, and I feel like that was doing something. But as long as I've turned down the music in like the proper ratio to it, like, you know, desktop sound to microphone ratio, therefore it shouldn't be too bad. It should just make the stream a little bit quieter. But it probably isn't that much of a difference anyway, to be fair, so I don't care. I've got an Asda Cafe Latte caramel flavoured right here. I love coffee. This is the third that I've had. I like the little caramel coffees, like the Starbucks ones and the Asda ones that you get. Gorgeous. Whew. But yeah, if this wants to... Apologies, Your Honour. Good. Ooh, microphones decide not to pick up on us every now and then. That needs sorting out later. Not right now, though. Yeah, that should be okay. A little audio check just real quick, just to make sure. I like the little caramel. It's Starbucks. I over-anticipate how quiet the music actually is. I don't know. There you were. A little bit. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Come on. I'm not sure how much of that you actually picked up, or if you only picked up the part of me accidentally hitting my mic. But I was just doing a little bit of ASMR while I opened up the coffee. Yes. Good. I'm ready to go. Yeah. I used me second COVID jab vaccination card as my bookmark because I didn't have one. I don't have bookmarks. It was the only thing that's on my desk at the moment. That's the only thing I can use as a bookmark on my desk at the moment. Whew. But without further ado, and hopefully I don't spill the coffee. Remarkable. Hang on. Apologies. Oh. Oh. It's actually called The Remarkable Incident of Dr. Lanyon, but here it's just called The Incident of Dr. Lanyon. Fair enough. And, oh, this whole chapter can fit on one slide. That's actually quite helpful for me. However, in the book, it's about 4 pages, so... Oof. Time ran on. Thousands of pounds were offered in reward. The death of Sir Danvers was resented as a public injury, but Hyde had disappeared out of the ken of police as though he had never existed. Much of his past was unearthed, indeed, and though disreputable, tales came out of the man's cruelty, at once so callous and violent, of his vile life, and his strange associates, of the hatred that seemed to have surrounded his career, but of his present whereabouts, not a whisper from the time he had left in the house in Soho, in the morning of the murder. He was simply blotted out, and gradually as time drew on, Mr. Utterson began to recover from the hotness of his alarm, and to grow more at quiet with himself. The death of Sir Danvers was, to his way of thinking, more than paid for by the disappearance of Mr. Hyde. Now that the evil influence had been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. He came out of his seclusions, renewed relations with his friends, became once more their familiar guest and entertainer, and whilst he had always been known for his charities, he was now no less distinguished for religion. He was busy, he was much in the open air, he did good, his face seemed to open and brighten, as if with an inward consciousness of service, and for more than 2 months the doctor was at peace. The 8th of January, Utterson had dined at the doctor's. A small party. Lanyon had been there, and the face of the host had looked from one to the other, as in the old days when the trio were inseparable friends. On the 12th, and again on the 14th the door was shut against the lawyer. The doctor was confined to the house, Poole said. Saw no one. The 15th he tried again, but was again refused, and having now been used for the last 2 months to see his friend almost daily, he found his return of solitude to weigh upon his spirits. The 5th night he had in guest to dine with him, and the 6th he betook himself to Dr. Lanyon's. There at least he had not denied admittance, but when he came in, he was shocked at the change which had taken place in the doctor's appearance. He had his death warrant written legibly upon his face. The rosy man had grown pale. His flesh had fallen away. He was visibly bolder and older, yet it was not so much these tokens of a swift physical decay that arrested the lawyer's notice, as look in the eye and the quality of manner that seemed to testify to some deep-seated terror in the mind. It was unlikely that the doctor should fear death, and yet that was what Utterson was tempted to suspect. Yes, he thought, he is a doctor. He must know his own state, and that his days are counted, and the knowledge is more than he can bear. And yet when Utterson remarked on his ill looks, it was with an air of great firmness that Lanyon declared himself a doomed man. I have had a shock, he said. I shall never recover. It is a question of weeks. Well, life has been pleasant. I liked it. Yes, sir, I used to like it. I sometimes think if we knew all, we should be more glad to get away. Jekyll is ill, too, observed Utterson. Have you seen him? But Lanyon's face changed. He held up a trembling hand. I wish to see or hear no more of Dr. Jekyll, he said in a loud, unsteady voice. I am quite done with that person, and I beg that you will spare me any allusion to the one whom I regard as dead. Tut tut, said Mr. Utterson, and then after a considerable pause, Can I do anything? He inquired. We are 3 very old friends, Lanyon. We shall not live to make others. Nothing can be done, returned Lanyon. Ask himself. He will not see me, said the lawyer. I am not surprised at that, was the reply. Some day, Utterson, and after I am dead, you may perhaps come to learn the right and wrong of this. I cannot tell you, and in the meantime, if you can sit and talk with me of other things, for God's sake, stay and do so. But if you cannot keep clear of this accursed topic, then, in God's name, go, for I cannot bear it. As soon as he got home, Utterson sat down and wrote to Jekyll complaining of his exclusion from the house, and asking the cause of this unhappy break with Lanyon. The next day brought him a long answer, often very pathetically worded, and sometimes darkly mysterious in drift. The quarrel with Lanyon was incurable. I do not blame our old friend, Jekyll wrote, but I share his view that we must never meet. I mean, from henceforth to lead a life of extreme seclusion, you must not be surprised, nor must you doubt my friendship. My door is often shut even to you. You must suffer me to go on my own dark way. I have brought on myself a punishment and a danger that I cannot name. If I am a chief of sinners, I am the chief of sufferers also. I cannot not think that this earth contained a place for sufferings and terrors so unmanning. You can do but one thing, Utterson, to lighten this destiny, and that is to respect my silence. Utterson was amazed that the dark influence of Hyde had been withdrawn. The doctor had returned to his old tasks and amities a week ago. The prospect had smiled with every promise of a cheerful and an honoured age, and now in a moment, friendship and peace of mind and the whole tenor of his life were wrecked. So great and unprepared a change pointed to madness. In view of Lanyon's manner and words, there must lie for it some deeper ground. A week afterwards, Dr. Lanyon took to his bed, and in something less than a fortnight he was dead. The night after the funeral, at which he had been sadly affected, Utterson locked the door of his business room, and sitting there by the light of a melancholy candle, drew out and set before him an envelope addressed by hand and sealed with the seal of his dear friend. Private, for the hands of J.G. Utterson alone, and in case of his predecease, to be destroyed unread. So it was emphatically superscribed, and the lawyer dreaded to behold the contents. I have buried one friend today, he thought. What if this should cost me another? And then he condemned the fear as a disloyalty, and broke the seal. Within there was another enclosure, likewise sealed and marked upon the cover as, not to be opened till the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll. Utterson could not trust his eyes. It was disappearance. Yes, it was disappearance, here again, as in the mad will which he had long ago restored to its author. Here again were the idea of a disappearance and the name of Henry Jekyll bracketed. But in the will, the idea had sprung from the sinister suggestion of the man Hyde. It was set there with a purpose all too plain and horrible. And by the hand of Lanyon. What should it mean? A great curiosity came on the trustee to disregard the prohibition and dive at once. Ooh. I did not mean to the bottom of these mysteries. Professional honour and faith to his dead friend were stringent obligations. The packet slept in the inmost corner of his private safe. It is one thing to mortify curiosity, another to conquer it, and it may be doubted if, from that day forth, Utterson desired the society of his surviving friend with the same eagerness. He thought of him kindly, but his thoughts were disquieted and fearful. He went to call, indeed, but he was perhaps relieved to be denied admittance. Perhaps, in his heart, he preferred to speak with Poole upon the doorstep, and surrounded by the air and sounds of the open city, rather than to be admitted into that house of voluntary bondage, and to sit and speak with its inscrutable recluse. Poole had, indeed, no pleasant news to communicate. The doctor, it appeared, now more than ever confined himself to the cabinet over the laboratory, where he would sometimes even sleep. He was out of spirits. He had grown very silent. He did not read. He did not read. It seemed as if he had something on his mind. But became so used to the unvarying character of these reports that he fell off little by little in frequency of his visits. I have nothing to really say about that one. It's like, wow. Oh god, this is tiny. Enough. Whew. We're nearly there, boys. Chapter 7, I think. Yeah, it's 7. Incident at the window. It chanced on Sunday, when Mr. Utterson was on his usual walk with Mr. Enfield, that either way lay once again through the by-street, and that when they came in front of the door, both stopped to gaze on it. "Well," said Enfield, "that story is at an end at least. We shall never see more of Mr. Hyde." "I hope not," said Utterson. "Did I ever tell you that I once saw him, and shared your feeling of repulsion?" "It was impossible to do the one without the other," returned Enfield. And by the way, what an arse you must be to have thought me not to know that this was a back way to Dr. Jekyll's. It was partly your own fault that I found it out, even when I did." "So you found it out, did you?" said Utterson. "But if that be so, we must step into the court and take a look at the windows. To tell you the truth, I am uneasy about poor Jekyll, and even outside, I feel as if the presence of a friend might do him good." The court was very cool and a little damp, and full of premature twilight, although the sky, high up overhead, was still bright with sunset. The middle one of the 3 windows was halfway open, and sitting close beside it, taking the aim with infinite sadness of mind, like some disconsolate prisoner, Utterson saw Dr. "What, Jekyll?" he cried. "I trust you are better." "I am very low, Utterson," replied the doctor drearily. "Very low. It will not last long, thank God." "You stay too much indoors," said the lawyer. "You should be out, whipping up circulation like Mr. Enfield and me. This is my cousin, Mr. Enfield, Dr. Jekyll. Come, now, get your hat and take a quick turn with us." "You are very good," sighed the other. "I should like to, very much, but no, it is quite impossible. I dare not, but indeed, Utterson, I am glad to see you. This is really a great pleasure. I would ask you and Mr. Enfield up. The place is really enough." "Why then?" said the lawyer. "Good-naturedly. The best thing we can do is to stay down here, and speak with you from where we are." "That is just what I was about to venture to propose," returned the doctor with a smile, but the words were hardly uttered, for the smile was struck out of his face, and succeeded by an expression of such abject terror and despair as froze the very blood of the 2 gentlemen below. They saw it for a glimpse, but the window was instantly thrust down. But that glimpse had been sufficient, and they turned and left the court without a word. In silence, too, they traversed the by-street, and it was not until they had come into a neighbouring thoroughfare, where even upon a Sunday there were still some stirrings of life, that Mr. Utterson at last turned and looked at his companion. They were both pale, and there was an answering horror in their eye. "God forgive us," God forgive us, said Mr. Utterson. Miss Enfield only nodded his head very seriously and walked on once more in silence. That's unusually short, considering some of the chapters were massive. And that's the 7th chapter out of 10. This is the 8th one. Ah. Right. The length of this chapter makes up for the previous one, fair enough. Whew. We're nearly there, boys. After this one, there's only 2 chapters left, so... We've nearly got it. Nearly got it. The last night, Mr. Utterson was sitting by his fireside one evening after dinner, when he was surprised to receive a visit from Poole. "Bless me, Poole, what brings you here?" he cried, and then taking a second look at him. "What ails you?" he added. "Is the doctor ill?" "Mr. Utterson," said the man, "there is something wrong." "Take a seat, and here is a glass of wine for you," said the lawyer. "Take your time and tell me plainly what you want." "You know the doctor's ways, sir," replied Poole, "and how he shuts himself up. Well, he shut up again in the cabinet. I don't like it, sir. I wish I may die if I like it, Mr. Utterson, sir, I'm afraid." "Now, my good man," said the lawyer, "be explicit. What are you afraid of?" "I've been afraid for about a week," returned Poole, doggedly disregarding the question. "I can bear it no more." The man's appearance amply bore out his words. His manner was altered for the worse, and except for the moment when he had first announced his terror, he had not once looked the lawyer in the face. Even now he sat with the glass of wine untasted on his knee, and his eyes directed to a corner of the floor. "I can bear it no more," he repeated. "Come," said the lawyer, "I see you have some good reason, Poole. I see there is something seriously amiss. Try to tell me what it is." "I think there's been foul play," said Poole hoarsely. "Foul play?" cried the lawyer, a good deal frightened and rather inclined to be irritated in consequence. "What foul play? What does the man mean?" "I daren't say it," was the answer. "But will you come along with me and see for yourself?" Mr. Utterson only was to rise and get his hat and great coat, but he observed with wonder the greatness of the relief that appeared upon the butler's face, and perhaps with no less that the wine was still untasted when he set it down. It was a wild, cold, seasonly night of March, with the pale moon lying on her back as though the wind had tilted her, a flying wrack of the most diaphanous and lawny texture. The wind made talking difficult, and flecked the blood on the face. It seemed to have set the street unusually bare of passengers. Besides, Mr. Utterson thought he had never seen that part of London so deserted. He could have wished it otherwise. Never in his life had he been conscious of so sharp a wish to see and touch his fellow creatures. Struggle as he might, there was borne in upon his mind a crushing anticipation of calamity. The square, when they got there, was all full of wind and dust, and the thin trees in the garden were lashing themselves along the railing. Poole, who had kept all the way a pace or two ahead, now pulled up in the middle of the pavement, and in spite of the biting weather, took off his hat and mopped his brow with a red pocket handkerchief. But for all the hurry of his coming, these were not the dews of exertion, and he wiped away, but the moisture of some strangling anguish, for his face was white and his voice when he spoke harsh and broken. "Well, sir," he said, "here we are, and God grant there be nothing wrong." "Amen, Poole," said the lawyer. Thereupon the servant knocked in a very guarded manner. The door was opened on the chain, and a voice asked from within, "Is that you, Poole?" "It's all right," said Poole. "Open the door." The hall, when they entered, was brightly lighted up. The fire was built high, and about the hearth, the whole of the servants, men and women, stood huddled together like a flock of sheep. At the sight of Mr. Utterson, the housemaid broke into hysterical whimpering, and the cook crying out, "Bless God, it's Mr. Utterson," ran forwards as if to take him in her arms. What? Are you all here?" said the lawyer peevishly. "Very irregular, very unseemly. Your master would be far from pleased." "They're all afraid," said Poole. Blank silence followed, no one protesting, only the maid lifted up her voice and now wept loudly. "Hold your tongue," Poole said to her, with a ferocity of accent that testified to his own jangled nerves, and indeed when the girl had so suddenly raised the note of her lamentation, they had all started and turned towards the inner door with faces of dreadful expectation. "And now," continued the butler, addressing the knife boy, Reach me a candle, and we'll get this through hands at once." And then he begged Mr. Urson to follow him and led the way to the back garden. What was I up to? I've lost my. Oh, never mind. I was about to say I lost my place, but I've just found it again. "Now, sir," said he, "you come as gently as you can. I want you to hear, and I don't want you to be heard. And see here, sir, if by any chance he was to ask you in, don't go." Mr. Urson's nerves, as this unlooked-for termination gave a jerk that nearly threw him off from his balance, but he recollected his courage and followed the butler into the laboratory building, and through the surgical theatre, with its lumber of crates and bottles, to the foot of the stair. Here Paul motioned him to stand on one side and listen, while he himself, settling down the candles and making a great and obvious call on his resolution, mounted the steps and knocked with a somewhat uncertain hand on the red baize of the cabinet door. "Mr. Urson, sir, asking to see you," he called, and even as he did so, once more violently signed to the lawyer to give ear. A voice answered from within. "Tell him I cannot see anyone," it said, complainingly. "Thank you, sir," said Paul, with a note of something like triumph in his voice. And taking up his candle, he led Mr. Urson back across the yard and into the great kitchen, where the fire was out and the beetles were leaping on the floor. "Sir," he said, looking with Mr. Urson in the eyes, "was that my master's voice?" "It seems much changed," replied the lawyer, very pale but giving look. "Changed? Well, yes, I think so," said the butler. "I've been 20 years in this man's house to be deceived about his voice. No, sir. Master's made away with. He was made away with 8 days ago, when we heard him cry out upon the name of God. And who's in there instead of him? And why it stays there, is a thing that cries to heaven, Mr. Urson." "This is a very strange tale, Paul. This is rather a wild tale, my man." And Mr. Urson, biting his fingers. "Suppose it were as you suppose, supposing Dr. Jekyll to have been, well, murdered, what could induce the murderer to stay? That won't hold water, it doesn't commend itself to reason." "Well, Mr. Urson, you are a hard man to satisfy, but I'll do it yet," said Poole. "All this last week, you must know. Him, or it, or whatever it is that lives in that cabinet, has been crying night and day for some sort of medicine and cannot get it to his mind. It was sometimes his way, the master's that is, to write his orders on a sheet of paper to throw it on the stair. We've had nothing else to this week back, nothing but papers and a closed door. And with the very meals left there to be smuggled in when nobody was looking, well, sir, every day, the twice and thrice in the same day, there have been orders in the complaints, and I've been sent flying to all the wholesale chemists in town. Every time I bought stuff back, there would be another paper telling me to return it, because it was not pure. Another order to a different firm. This drug is wanted bitter bad, sir, whatever for." I'm trying to look at the screen to see where I need to turn the page again. It's, yeah, so it's the end of the next page. "Have you any of these papers?" asked Mr. Utterson. Poole felt in his pocket and handed out a crumpled note, which the lawyer, bending near to the candle, carefully examined. Its contents ran thus: "Dr. Jekyll presents his compliments to Messrs. Moore. He assures them that their last sample is impure and quite useless for his present purpose. In the year 18-something, Dr. J purchased a somewhat large quantity from Mrs. M. He now begs them to search with the most sedulous care, and should any of the same quality be left, to forward it to him at once. Expense is no consideration. The importance of this to Dr. J can hardly be exaggerated." So far from the letter had run composedly enough, but here with a sudden splutter of the pen, the writer's emotion had broken loose. "For God's sake," he had added, "find me some of the old." "This is a strange note," said Mr. Utterson, and then sharply, "How do you come to have it open?" "The man at Moore's was main angry, sir, and he threw it back to me like so much dirt," returned Poole. "This is unquestionably the doctor's hand, do you know?" resumed the lawyer. "I thought it looked like it," said the servant rather sulkily, and then with another voice, "What matters hand of right? he said. I've seen him. Seen him? Repeated Mr. Utterson. Well, that's it, said Poole. It was this way. I came suddenly into the theatre from the garden. It seems he had slipped out to look for his drug, or whatever it is, for the cabinet door was open, and there he was at the far end of the room, digging among the crates. He looked up when I came in, gave a kind of cry, and whipped upstairs into the cabinet. It was but for 1 minute that I saw him, and the hairs stood upon my head like quills. Sir, if that was my master, why had he a mask upon his face? If it was my master, why did he cry out like a rat? And run from me? I have served him long enough, and then... The man paused and passed his hand over his face. I need coffee. These are very strange circumstances, said Mr. Utterson. But I think I begin to see daylight. Your master, Poole, is plainly seized with one of those maladies, and that both torture and deform the sufferer. Hence, for aught I know, the alteration of his voice, hence the mask and his avoidance of his friend, hence his eagerness to find this drug, by means of which the poor soul retains some hope of ultimate recovery. God grant that he not be deceived. There is my explanation. It is sad enough, Poole. And appalling to consider, but it is plain and natural, hangs well together and delivers us from all exorbitant alarms. Sir, said the butler, turning to a sort of mottled pallor, that thing was not my master, and there's the truth. My master... He looked round him and began to whisper. He's a tall, fine build of a man, and this was more of a dwarf. Utterson attempted to protest. Oh, sir, cried Poole. Do you think I do not know my master after 20 years? Do you think I do not know where his head comes to in the cabinet door, where I saw him every morning of my life? No, sir, that thing in the mask was never Dr. Jekyll. God knows what it was, but it was never Dr. Jekyll, and it is the belief of my heart that there was a murder done. My God, this chapter goes on for ages. I've got pages left, man. I'm nowhere near done. This is a very strange tale, Poole. It's rather a wild tale, my man. Oh, have you seen this? No, I haven't flipped the page yet, have I? Yeah, I haven't. Poole, replied the lawyer. If you say that, it will become my duty to make it certain. Much as I desire to space your master's feelings, much as I am puzzled by this note which seems to prove him to be still alive, I shall consider it my duty to break in that door. Ah, Mr. Utterson, that's talking, cried the butler. And now comes the second question, resumed Utterson. Who's going to do it? Why, you and me, sir, was the undaunted reply. That's very well said, returned the lawyer. Whatever comes of it, I shall make it my business to see you on or loser. There is an axe in the theatre, continued Poole, and you might take the kitchen poker for yourself. The lawyer took that rude but weighty instrument into his hand and balanced it. Do you know, Poole, he said, looking up, that you and I are about to place ourselves in a position of some peril? You may say so, sir, indeed, returned the butler. It is well, then, that we should be frank, said the other. We both think more than we have said. Let us make a clean breast. This masked figure that you saw, did you recognise it? Well, sir, it went so quick and the creature was so doubled up that I could hardly swear to that, was the answer. But if you mean was it Mr. Hyde, why yes, I think it was. You see, it was much of the same bigness, it had the same quick light and way with it, and then who else could have got in by the laboratory door? You have not forgotten, sir, that at the time of the murder he had still the key with him. But that's not all. I do not know, Mr. Utterson, if ever you met this Mr. Hyde. Yes, said the lawyer, I went and spoke with him. Then you must know as well as the rest of us that there was something queer about that gentleman, and that gave him a turn. I don't know rightly how to say it, sir, beyond this, that you felt a marrow kind of cold and thin. I own I felt something of what you describe, said Mr. Utterson. Quite so, sir, returned Poole. But when that masked thing, like a monkey, jumped from among the chemicals and whipped into the cabinet, it went down my spine like ice. Oh, I know it's not evidence, Mr. Utterson. I know it's not evidence, Mr. Utterson. I'm book learned enough for that. But a man has his feelings, and I give you my Bible word it was Mr. Hyde. I still don't get how I'm supposed to say that. That doesn't sound right in a sentence. Aye, said the lawyer. My fears inclined to the same point. Evil, I fear, founded. Evil was sure to come of that connection. Aye, truly I believe you. I believe poor Harry is killed, and I believe this murderer, for what purpose, God alone can tell, is still lurking in his victim's room. Well, let our name be Vengeance. Call Bradshaw. The footman came at the summons, very white and nervous. Pull yourself together, Bradshaw, said the lawyer. The suspense, I know, is telling upon all of you, but it's now in our intention to make an end of it. Poole here and I are going to force our way into the cabinet. If all is well, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the blame. Meanwhile, lest anything should really be amiss when a malefactor seeks to escape by the back, and you and the boy must go around the corner with a pair of good sticks and take your post at the laboratory door. We give you 10 minutes to get to your stations. As Bradshaw left, the lawyer looked at his watch. And now, Poole, let us get ours, he said, and taking the poker under his arm, he led the way into the yard. The scud had banked over the moon, and it was now quite dark. The wind, which only broke in puffs and draughts into that deep well of buildings, tossed the light in the candle to and fro about the steps till they had came into the shelter of the theatre, where they sat down silently to wait. London hummed solemnly all round, but nearer at hand, the stillness was only broke by the sound of a footfall moving to and fro along the cabinet floor. So it will walk all day, sir, said Poole. Aye, the better part of the night, only when a new sample comes from the chemist's. There's a bit of break. Ah, it's an ill conscious, that's such an enemy to rest. Ah, sir, there's blood foully shed in every step of it. But hark again, a little closer. Put your heart in your ears, Mr. Utterson, and tell me, is that the doctor's foot? Steps fell lightly and oddly with a certain swing, for all they went for slowly. It was different indeed from the heavy creaking tread of Henry Jekyll. Utterson sighed. Is there never anything else? He asked. Paul nodded. Once, he said. Once I heard weeping. Weeping? How that? Said the lawyer, conscious of a sudden chill of horror. Weeping like a woman or a lost soul, said the butler. I came away with that upon my heart. I could have wept too. Bloody hell, this chapter's massive compared to all the others. Anyhow. My throat's starting to kick it again, but I haven't got long left, so I want to finish it today. But now the 10 minutes drew to an end. Poole disinterred the axe from under a stack and packing straw. The candle was set upon the nearest table to light them to the attack, and they drew near with the bated breath to where the patient foot was still going up and down, in the quiet of the night. Jekyll, cried Utterson with a loud voice, I demand to see you. He paused a moment, but there came no reply. I give you a fair warning. Our suspicions are aroused, and I must and shall see you, he resumed. If not by fair means, then by foul. If not of your consent, then by brute force. Utterson, said the voice, for God's sake have mercy. Ah, that's not Jekyll's voice, it's Hyde's, cried Utterson. Down with the door, Poole. Poole swung the axe over his shoulder. The blow shook the building, and the red baize door leaped against the lock and hinges. A dismal screech, as of mere animal terror, rang from the cabinet. Up went the axe again, and again the panels crashed and the flame bounded. 4 times the blow fell. And the wailing wood was tough, and the fittings were of excellent workmanship. And it was not until the 5th that the lock burst in sudden, and the wreck of the door fell inwards on the carpet. The besiegers, appalled by their own riot and the stillness that had succeeded, stood back a little and peered in. There lay the cabinet before their eyes, and in quiet lamplight, a good fire glowing and chattering on their hearth. The kettle singing its thin strain, a drawer or two opened, papers neatly set forth on the business table, and near the fire, the things laid out for tea. Quietest room, you could have said, and the glazed press full of chemicals, the most commonplace that night in London. Right in the midst there lay the body of a man sorely contorted and still twitching. They drew near on tiptoe, turned it on its back, and beheld the face of Edward Hyde. He was dressed in clothes far too large for him, clothes of the doctor's bigness. The cords of his face still moved with the semblance of life, but life was quite gone, and by the crushed file in the hand under the strong smell of kernels that hung upon the air, Utterson knew he was looking at the body of a self-destroyer. Oh, no, me throat's going. Oh, fuck. We have come too late, he said sternly. Whether to save or punish, Hyde has gone to his own account. It only remains for us to find the body of your master. A far greater proportion of the building was occupied by the theatre, which filled almost the whole ground story up and was lighted from above, and by the cabinet which formed an upper story at one end and looked upon the court. The corridor joined the theatre to the door on the by-street, and with this the cabinet communicated separately by a second flight of stairs. There was besides a few dark closets and a spacious cellar. All these they now thoroughly examined. Each closet needed but a glance, for all were empty and all, by the dust that fell from their doors, had stood long unopened. The cellar indeed was filled with crazy lumber, mostly dating from the times of the surgeon who was Jekyll's predecessor. But even as they opened the door, they were advertised of the uselessness of further research by the fall of a perfect mat of cobwebs, which had for years sealed up the entrance. Nowhere was there any trace of Henry Jekyll, dead or alive. Poole stamped on the flags of the corridor. He must be buried here, he said, hearkening to the sound. Or he may have fled, said Utterson, and he turned to examine the door of the by-street. It was locked and lying near by on the flags. They found the key already stained with rust. This does not look like use, observed the lawyer. Use, echoed Poole. Do you not see it, sir? It is broken, much as if a man had stamped on it. Aye, continued Utterson, and the fractures too are rusty. The two men looked at each other with scarce. This is beyond me, Poole, said the lawyer. Let's go back to the cabinet. I'm still conscious of like the scrolling thing. I'm nowhere near the end, if you're wondering. Cabinet. They monitored the stair with silence, and still with an occasional awestruck glance at the dead body, proceeded more thoroughly to examine the contents of the cabinet. On one table there were traces of chemical work, various measured heaps of some white salt being laid on glass saucers, as though for an experiment in which the unhappy man had been prevented. That is the same drug that I was always bringing him, said Poole, and even as he spoke, the kettle with a startling noise boiled over. This brought them to the fireside, where the easy chair was drawn cosily up. The tea thing stood ready to the sitter's elbow. The very sugar in the cup. There were several books on a shelf, one lay beside the tea things open. And Utterson was amazed to find it a copy of a pious work, for which Jekyll had several times expressed a great esteem, annotated in his own hand, and startling blasphemies. This brought them to the fire. Really? Wait, where did I get up to? Yeah. Next in the course of their review of the chambers, the searchers came to the cheval glass, into whose depths they looked with an involuntary horror, but it was so turned as to show them nothing but the rosy glow playing on the roof, the fire sparkling in 100 repetitions along the glazed front of the presses, and her own pale and fearful countenances stooping to look in. "This class has seen some strange things, sir," whispered Poole, "and surely none stranger than itself," echoed the lawyer in the same tones. For did Jekyll, he caught himself up at the word with a start, and in conquering the weakness, what could Jekyll want with it? So he said, "You may say that," said Poole. May as well scroll down so it now fits. We're up to here. Next they turned to the business table. On the desk among the neat array of papers, a large envelope was uppermost and bore in the doctor's hand the name of Mr. Utterson. The lawyer unsealed it, and several enclosures fell to the floor. The first was a will, drawn in the same eccentric terms as the one which he had returned 6 months before, to serve as a testament in case of death and as a deed of gift in case of disappearance, but in place of the name of Edward Hyde, the lawyer, and with indescribable amazement, read the name Gabriel John Utterson. He looked at Poole and then back at the paper, and last of all at the dead malefactor stretched upon the carpet. "My head goes round," he said. "He has been all these days in possession. He had no cause to like me. He must have raged to see himself displaced, and he has not destroyed this document." He caught up the next paper. It was a brief note to the doctor's hand and dated at the top. "Oh, Poole," the lawyer cried. "He was alive and here this day. He cannot have been disposed of in any so short a pace. He must be still alive. He must have fled, and then, why fled? And how? and in that case, we can venture to declare this suicide. Or you must be careful, I foresee that we may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe. Why don't you read it, sir? Asked Poole. Because I fear, replied the lawyer solemnly. God grant I have no cause for it. And with that he brought the paper to his eyes, and read as follows. My dear Utterson, when this shall fall into your hands, I shall have disappeared. Under what circumstances I have not the penetration to foresee. My instinct and the circumstances of my nameless situation tell me that the end is sure, and I must speak early. Go then, and first read the narrative which Lanyon warned me was to place in your hands. If you care to hear more, turn to the confession of your unworthy and happy friend, read Jekyll. There was a third enclosure, asked Utterson. Here, sir, said Poole, and gave into his hand a considerable packet sealed in several places. The lawyer put it in his pocket. I would say nothing of this paper. If your master has fled or is dead, we may at least save his credit. It is now 10. I must go home and read these documents in quiet, but I shall be back before when we shall send for the police. They went out, locking the door on the theatre behind them, and then Utterson, once more leaving the servants gathered about the fire in the hall, trudged back to his office to read the 2 narratives in which this mystery is now to be explained. Whew. Chapter 9. Not as long as the previous one, but still quite a bit. My throat's starting to really take it again, but only 2 more chapters. I think I can do it, because I don't think chapter 10's that big. I don't think. Also, if you're wondering why it says like 18 something, it's basically to represent the 18th century, but not a specific year within or the 19th century, I mean. Like 1800 sort of thing. I get that's not hugely clear, but like, you know, just thought I'd make it. Dr. Lanyon's narrative. On the 9th of January, now 4 days ago, I received by the evening delivery a registered envelope addressed in the hand of my colleague, an old school companion, Henry Jekyll. I was a good deal surprised by this. We had no means in the habit of correspondence. I had seen the man, dined with him, indeed, the night before. I could imagine nothing in our intercourse that should justify the formality of registration. Contents increased my wonder. This is now how the letter ran. 10th of December, 1800. Dear Lanyon, you're one of my oldest friends, and although we may have differed at times on scientific questions, I can remember, at least on my side, any break in our... There was never a day when, if you had said to me, Jekyll, my life, my honour, my reason depend upon you, I would not have sacrificed my fortune or my left hand to help. Lanyon, my life, my honour, my reason are all at your mercy. If you fail me tonight, I am lost. You might suppose after this preface that I am going to ask you for something dishonourable to grant. Judge for yourself. I want you to postpone all other engagements for tonight. Aye, even if you were summoned to the bedside of an emperor to take a cab, unless your carriage should be actually at the door, and with this letter in your hand for consultation, drive straight to my house. Poole, my butler, has his orders. You'll find him waiting for your arrival with the locksmith. The door of my cabinet is then to be forced, and you are to go in alone. To open the glazed press, letter E on the left hand, breaking the lock, if it be shut, then draw out, with all its contents as they stand. The 4th drawer from the top, or, which is the same thing, 3rd from the bottom. My extreme distress of mind, I have a morbid fear of misdirecting you, but even if I am in error, you may know the right drawer by its contents, powders, a file, a paper book. This drawer, I beg of you, carry back with you to Cavendish Square exactly as it stands. This is the first part of the service, now for the second. You should be back, if you set out at once on this recipe for this, and before midnight if you will leave you that amount of margin, not only in the fear of one of those obstacles that can neither be prevented nor foreseen, because an hour when your servants are in bed is to be preferred for when they will remain to do. At midnight, then, I have to ask you to be alone in your consulting room, to admit with your own hand into the house a man who will present himself in my name, and to place in his hands the drawer that you will have brought with you from the cabinet. Then you will have played your part and earned my gratitude completely. 5 minutes afterwards, if you insist upon an explanation, you have understood that these arrangements are of capital importance, that by the neglect of one of them, fantastic as they must appear, You might have charged your conscience with my death or the shipwreck of my reason. Confident as I am that you will not trifle with this appeal, my heart sinks and my hand trembles at the bare thought of such a possibility. Think of me at this hour, in the strange place, labouring under a blackness of distress that no fancy can exaggerate, yet well aware that, if you will punctually serve me, others will roll away like a story that is told. Serve me, my dear Lanyon, and save your friend. God damn. Yes, I had already sailed this up when a fresh terror struck upon my soul. It's possible that the post office may fail me. This letter not come into your hands until tomorrow morning. In that case, dear Lanyon, do my errand when it should be most convenient for you in the course of the day. Once more expect my messenger at midnight. It may then already be too late. If that night passes without event, you know that you have seen the last of Henry Jekyll. Upon the reading of this letter, I made sure my colleague was insane, but till that was proved beyond the possibility of doubt, I felt bound to do as he requested. The less I understood this far go, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance, and an appeal so worded could not be set aside without grave responsibility. I rose accordingly from the table, got into hansom, and drove straight to Jekyll's house. The butler was awaiting my arrival. He had received by the same post as mine a registered letter of instruction. I had sent at once for a locksmith and a carpenter. The tradesman came while we were yet speaking, and we moved in a body to old Dr. Denman's surgical theatre, from which, as you are doubtless aware, Jekyll's private cabinet is most convenient to enter. The door was very strong, the lock excellent. The carpenter avowed he would have great trouble and have to do much damage. If force were to be used, and the locksmith was near to spare. But this last was a handy fellow, and after 2 hours' work, the door stood open. The press marked E wasn't locked, and I took out the drawer. I had it filled up with straw and tied in a sheet, and returned with it to Cavendish Square. Here I proceeded to examine its contents. Powders were neatly enough made up, but not with the nicety of the dispensing chemist, so that it was plain that they were Jekyll's private manufacture. And when I opened one of the wrappers, I found what seemed to me a simple crystalline salt of a white colour. The vial, of which I next turned my attention, might have been about half full of a blood-red liquor, which was highly pungent to the sense of smell and seemed to me to contain phosphorus and some volatile ether. At the other ingredients I could make no guess. The book was an ordinary version book, and contained little but a series of dates. These covered a period of many years, but I observed that the entries ceased nearly a year ago, and quite abruptly. Here and there, a brief marking was appended to a date, usually more than a single word double, occurring perhaps 6 times in a total of several hundred entries. Once very early in the list, followed by several marks of exclamation, quote of failure. All this, though it whetted my curiosity, told me little that was definite. Here a file of some tincture? Here of some sort, and record of a series of experiments that had led, like too many of Jekyll's investigations, to no end of practical usefulness. How could the presence of these articles in my house affect either the honour, the sanity, or the life of my flighty colleague? His messenger could go in one place, why could he not go to another? Even granting some importance, why was this gentleman to be received by me in secret? The more I reflected, the more I convinced I grew that I was dealing with a case of cerebral disease, and though I dismissed my servants to bed, I loaded an old revolver that I might be found in some posture of self-defence. 12 o'clock had scarce rung out over London, ere the knocker sounded very gently on the door. I put myself at the summons, and found a small man crouching against the pillars of the portico? Are you come from Dr. Jekyll? I asked. He told me yes, by a constrained gesture, and when I had bidden him enter, he did not obey me. Without a searching backward glance into the darkness of the square, there was a policeman not far off, advancing with his bull's eye open at the sight. I thought my visitor started and made greater haste. These particulars struck me, I confess, disagreeably. Oh wait, I need to scroll down. These particulars struck me, I confess disagreeably, and as I followed him into the bright light of the consulting room, I kept my hand ready on my weapon. Here at last I had a chance of clearly seeing him. I had never set eyes on him before, so much was certain. He was small, and I have said, I was struck beside with the most shocking expression of his face. With his remarkable combination of great muscular activity and great apparent debility of constitution, and, last but not least, the odd subjective disturbance caused by his neighbourhood, this bore some resemblance to incipient rigour, and was accompanied by a marked sinking of the pulse. At the time, I set it down to some idiosyncratic personal distaste, and merely wondered at the acuteness of the symptoms. But I have since had reason to believe that the cause to lie much deeper in the nature of man, and to turn in some nobler hinge than the principle of hatred. This person, who had thus from the first moment of his entrance struck me in what I can only describe as disgustful curiosity, was dressed in a fashion that could only have made an ordinary person laughable. His clothes, let us so to say, although they were rich in sober fabric, were enormously too large for him in every measurement. The trousers hanging on his legs are rolled up to keep them from grounding, the waist and the coat of his below his haunches, and the collar sprawling wide upon his shoulders. Strange to relate, this ludicrous accoutrement was far from moving me to laughter. Rather, there was something abnormal and misbegotten in the very essence of this creature that now faced me. Something seizing, surprising, and revolting. This fresh disparity seemed but to fit in with and to reinforce it, so that to my interest in the man's nature and character there was added a curiosity as to his origin, his life, his fortune, and his status in the world. These observations, though they have taken so great a pace to be set down in, were yet the work of a few seconds. My visitor was, indeed, on fire with sombre excitement. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" And so lively was his impatience that he even laid his hand upon my arm and sought to shake me. I put him back, conscious as his touch of a certain icy pang along my blood. "Come, sir," said I, "you forget I have not yet the pleasure of your acquaintance. Lie seated, if you please." And I showed him an example, and sat down myself in a customary seat with as fair an imitation of my ordinary manner to be a patient, as the lateness of the house, the nature of my preoccupations, and the horror I had of my visitor would suffer me to muster. "I beg your pardon, Dr. Lanyon," he replied civilly enough. "What you say is very well founded, and my impatience had shown in its heels to my politeness. I come here at the assistance of your colleague, Dr. Henry Jekyll, on a piece of business of some moment, and I understood." He paused, and put his hand to his throat, and I could see, in spite of his collected manner, that he was wrestling against the reproaches of his hysteria. I understood. A drawer. But here I took pity on my visitor's suspense, and some perhaps on my own growing curiosity. "There it is, sir," I pointing to the drawer, where it lay on the floor behind a table, and still covered with the sheet. He sprang to it, and then paused, and laid his hand upon his heart. I could hear his teeth grate with convulsive action of his jaws, but his face was so ghastly to say that I grew alarmed both for his life and reason. "Compose yourself," I said. He turned a dreadful smile to me, and as if with the decision of despair, plucked away at the sheet. At sight of the contents, he uttered one loud sob of such immense relief that I sat petrified, and the next moment, in a voice that was already fairly well under control, Have you a graduated glass?" he asked. I rose from my place in something of an effort and gave him what he asked. He thanked me with a smiling nod, measured out a few minimums of the red tincture, and added one of the powders. The mixture, which was at first a reddish hue, began in proportion as the crystals melted to brighten in colour, so effervesce audibly, and to throw off small fumes of vapour. Suddenly, and at the same moment, the ebullition ceased and the compound changed to a dark purple, which faded again more slowly to a watery green. My visitor, who had watched these metamorphoses with a keen eye, smiled, set down the glass upon the table, and then turned and looked upon me with an air of scrutiny. "And now," said he, "to settle what remains, will you be wise? Will you be guided? Will you suffer me to take this glass in my hand to go forth from your house with further parley, or is the greed of curiosity too much command for you? Think before you answer, for it shall be done as you decide. As you decide, you shall be left as you before, and neither richer nor wiser, unless the sense of service rendered to a man in mortal distress may be counted as a sign of richer of the soul. Or, if you also prefer to choose, a new province of knowledge and new avenues to fame and power shall be laid upon to you, here in this room upon the instant, and your sight shall be blasted by a prodigy to stagger the unbelief of Satan. Sir, I said, affecting a coolness out I was far from truly possessing. You speak enigmas, and you'll perhaps not wonder that I hear you with no very strong impression of belief, but I have gone too far into the way of inexplicable services to pause before I see the end. It is well, replied my visitor. Lanyon, you remember your vows. What follows is under the seal of our profession. And now, you who have so long been bound to the most narrow and material views, who have been denied the virtue of transcendental medicine, you who have derided your superiors, hold. He put the glass down to his lips and drank at one gulp. A cry followed. He reeled, staggered, clutched at the table, and held on, staring with injected eyes, gasping with open mouth, and as he looked, there came, I thought, a change. He seemed to swell, his face became suddenly black, and the features seemed to melt and alter. In the next moment I had sprung to my feet and leaped back against the wall. My arms ran to steal me from the prodigy, my mind submerged in terror. "Oh God," I screamed, "oh God," again and again, for there before my eyes, pale and shaken and half fainting, and groping before him with his hands, like a man restored from death, there stood Henry Jekyll. But it told me in the next hour I cannot bring my mind to set on paper. I saw what I saw, I heard what I heard. My soul sickened at it, and yet now, when that sight has faded from my eyes, I ask myself if I believe it, and I cannot answer. My life is shaken to its roots, sleep has left me, and the deadliest terror sits by me at all hours of the day and night. I feel that my days are numbered, and that I must die, and yet I shall die incredulous. As for the moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence, I cannot, even in memory, dwell on it without a start of horror. I will say but one thing, Utterson, ends that, if you can bring your mind to credit it, will be more than enough. The creature who crept into my house that night was, on Jekyll's own confession, known by the name of Hyde, and hunted for in every corner of the land as the murderer of Carew. Hasty. Whoa. You get why I like this book. Oh my god. Jesus Christ, it's gonna take ages, but this is the final chapter. So, I'll flick forward a little bit in my book just to see how far it's left. Ooh, I have 15 pages left. Oh god. Well, I might as well get on with it. But my voice might clock out halfway through, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's really going. But that was interesting, that was cool, but it was interesting. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. I was born in the year 1800, to a large fortune, endowed beside with excellent parts, inclined by nature to industry, fond of the respect of the wise and good among my fellow men, and thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of an honourable and distinguished future. And indeed, the worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition, such as made the happiness of many, but such as I found it hard to reconcile with my imperious desire to carry my head high, and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. And it came about that I concealed my pleasures, and that when I reached years of reflection and began to look around me and take stock of my progress and position in the world, I stood already committed to a profoundly duplicity of life. Many a man would have even blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of, but from the high views of that I had set before me, I regarded and hid them almost more with sense of shame, and it was thus rather the exact nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation in my faults that made me what I was, and with even a deeper trench than in the majority of men, severed me in those provinces provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. In this case, I was driven to reflect deeply and inventariously, something like that, on that hard law of life, which lies at the root of religion and is one of the most plentiful springs of distress. Though so profound a double dealer, I was in no sense a hypocrite. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame, and when I laboured in the eye of the day and the furtherance of knowledge, or the relief of sorrow and suffering, and it chanced that the direction of my scientific studies, which led wholly towards the mystic and the transcendental, reacted and shed a strong light on this consciousness of a perennial war among my members. With every day and from both sides of my intelligence, the moral of the intellectual, I thus drew steadily near to that truth by whose partial discovery I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck that man is not truly one, but truly two. I say two, because the state of my own knowledge does not pass beyond that point. Others will follow, others will outstrip me on the same lines. And I hazard the guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere palette of multifarious incongruence and dependent denizens. I, for my part, for the nature of my life, advanced infallibly in one direction and in one direction only. It was on the moral side and in my own direction that I learned to recognise the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both, and from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as my beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements. If each, I told myself, could be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from aspirations and remorse over his more upright twin, and the just could walk steadfastly and securely on his upward path, doing the good thing in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of his extraneous evil. It was the curse of mankind that these incongruents... I'm not saying that. I'm not. I don't care if it's in the book, I'm not saying it. It was the curse of mankind that these incongruents were thus bound together. I had no idea that was in this book. Was this like, because we read this at school, was this just missed out of the, like, school edit of it? Because let's be real, we read of Mice and Men at school, and like... I had no idea the book had that in it. I'm not gonna lie, I probably wouldn't have this on stream at the moment if I knew that book had that in it, but we move. I've already read the entire rest of the book now, so I can't really get rid of it now. It was the curse of mankind that these incongruous were thus bound together, that in agonized womb of consciousness, these polar twins should be continuously struggling. How, then, were they dissociated? I was so far in my reflections when, as I have said, light began to shine upon the subject from the laboratory table. I began to perceive more deeply than it has ever yet been stated the trembling immateriality, the mist-like transience of the seemingly so-souled body in which we walk attired. Certain agents I found to have the power to shake and pluck back that fleshy vestment, even as the wind might toss the curtains of a pavilion. Two good reasons. It will not enter deeply into the scientific branch of my confession. First, because I have been made to learn that these doom burden of our life, it's bound forever on the man's shoulders, and when the attempt is made to cast it off, it but returns upon us with more unfamiliar and more unlawful pressure. Whoa! I've accidentally scrolled by accident. Second, because, as my narrative will make, alas, too evident, my discoveries were incomplete, enough then that I not only recognised my natural body for the mere aura of effulgence of certain of the powers of that made up my spirit, managed to compound a drug by which these powers should be dethroned from their supremacy, and the second form and countenance substituted, nonetheless natural to me because they were the expression and bore the stamp, a lower element in my soul. Oh wow, I've only read up to like there so far. I've only read this for the, oh god, this is a massive chapter, I mean. I hesitated long before I put this theory to the test of practice. I knew well that I had risked death for any drug that so potently controlled and shook the very fortress of identity, maybe the least scruple of an overdose, or the least inopportunity in the moment of exhibitation, utterly blot out that immaterial tabernacle which I took to it to change, but the temptation of a discovery so singular and profound at last overcame the suggestion of alarm. I had long since prepared my tincture. I purchased at once, from a firm of wholesale chemists, a large quantity of a particular salt which I knew from my experiments the last ingredient required. And late one accursed night, I compounded the elements, watched them boil and smoke together in the glass, and when the ebullition had subsidized, with a strong glow of courage, drank off the potion. The most racking pangs succeeded, a grounding in the bones, deadly nausea, and a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Then these agonies began swiftly to subside. I came to myself as if out of great sickness. There was something strange in my sensation, that something indescribably new, and from its very novelty incredibly sweet. But younger, lighter, happier in my body. Within I was conscious of my heady recklessness. A current of disordered within I was conscious of a heady recklessness. A current disordered sensual images running like a mill race in my fancy, a solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life, me more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sort of slave to my original evil, and the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of these sensations, and in the act I was suddenly aware that I had lost in stature. There was no mirror at that date in my room, though it stands beside me as I write. It was brought there later on for the very purpose of these transformations. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of the day. The inmates of my house were locked in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I determined, flushed as I was with hope and triumph, to venture my new shape as far to my bedroom, across the yard where my consolations looked down upon me. I could have thought with wonder, the first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. I stole through the corridors, a stranger in my own house, and coming to my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Ed. I was here speak by theory alone, saying not that which I know, but that which I suppose to be most probable. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy, was less robust and less developed than the good which I had just disposed. Again, in the course of my life, which had been, after all, 9/10 of a life of effort, virtue and control, it had been much exercised, like much less exhausted, and hence as I think it became about Edward Hyde, so much smaller, slightly younger than Henry Jekyll. Even as good shone upon my countenance of the one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. Evil besides, which I must still believe to be the lethal side of man, had yet on that body an imprint of deformity and decay, and yet when I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather of a leap of welcome. This too was myself. It seemed natural and human. In my eyes it bore a lively image of the spirit. It seemed more expressive, single than the imperfect and divided countenance I had been hitherto accustomed to call mine, and in so far I was doubtless right. I had observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. This, as I take it, was because all human beings, as we meet them, are coming led out of good and evil, and Edward Hyde alone in the ranks of mankind was pure. evil. I lingered but a moment at the mirror. The second and the conclusive experiment had yet to be attempted. It yet remained to be seen if I had lost my identity beyond redemption, must flee before daylight from a house that was no longer mine, and hurrying back to my cabinet, once more prepared and drank the cup, once more suffered the pangs of dissolution, and came to myself once more with the character, the stature, and the face of him. The night I had come to the fatal crossroads, I had approached my discovery in a more noble spirit. I had risked the experiment while under the empire and generous or pious aspirations. All must have been otherwise, and from these agonies of death and birth, I had come forth an angel instead of a fiend. The drug had no discriminating action. It was neither diabolical nor divine, but it shook the doors of the prison house of my disposition, and like the captives of Philippi, that which stood with ran forth. At that time my virtue slumbered. My evil, kept awake by ambition, was alert and swift to seize the equation, and the thing that was projected was Edward Hyde. Hence, although I had now two characters as well as two appearances, one was wholly evil, and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll. That incongruous compound of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. The movement was thus wholly toward the worse. Even at the time I had not yet conquered my aversion to the dryness of life of study. I would still be merrily disposed at times, and that my pleasures were, to say the least, undignified, and I was not only well and highly considered, but growing towards the elderly man. This incoherency of life was daily growing more unwelcome. It is on this side that my new power tempted me to feel until I fell in slavery. I had but to drink the cup, to doff at once and the body of the noted professor, and to assume like a thick cloak that of Edward Hyde. I smiled at the notion. It seemed to me that at the time to be humorous, and I made my preparations with the most studious care. I took and furnished a house in Soho, in which Hyde was tracked by the police and engaged a housekeeper, a creature whom I well knew to be silent and unscrupulous. On the other side, I announced to my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, to have full liberty and power about my house in the square. And to parry mishaps, I even called and made myself a familiar object in my character. I drew up that will to which you so much objected, so that if anything befell me in the person of Dr. Jekyll, I could enter on that of Edward Hyde without pecuniary loss, and thus fortified, as I supposed on every side, I began to profit by the strange immunities of my position. Men have before hired bravos to transact their crimes, while their own person and reputation sat under shelter. I was the first that ever did so for this pleasure. I was the first that could thus plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability, and in the moments, like a schoolboy, strip off these lendings and spring headlong in the sea of liberty. But for me, in my impenetrable mantle, the safety was complete. Think of it, I do not even exist. Let me but escape into my laboratory, a door, even but a second or two to mix and swallow the draught, and that I had always standing ready, in which he had done. Edward Hyde would pass away like the stain of breath upon a mirror, and there in his stead, quietly at home, trimming the midnight lamp in his study, a man who could afford to laugh at suspicion would be Henry Jekyll. The pleasure which I made haste to seek in my disguise were, as I have said, undignified. I would scarce use a harder term, but in the hands of Edward Hyde, they soon began to turn towards the monstrous. When I had come back from these excursions, I was often plunged into a kind of wonder at my vicarious depravity. This familiar that I called out of my own soul, and sent forth alone to do his good pleasure, was a being inherently malign and villainous. His every act and thought entered on self, drinking pleasure with bestial avidity from any degree of torture to another, relentless like a man of stone. Henry Jekyll stood at time aghast before the acts of Henry Hyde, but the situation, and apart from ordinary laws, and insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. Conscience? Yeah. It was Hyde after all, and Hyde alone, that was guilty. Jekyll was no worse. He woke again to his good qualities, seeing that unimpaired. He would even make haste, where it was possible, to endure the evil done by Hyde, and thus his conscience slumbered. Into the details and the infamy at which I thus connived But even now I can scarce grant that I committed it. I have no design of entering, I mean but to point out the warnings and the successive steps with which my chastisement I shall no more than mention. An act of cruelty to a child aroused against me the anger of a passerby, whom I recognised the other day in the person of your kinsman. The doctor and the child's family joined him, and there were moments when I feared for my life. And at last, in order to pacify their too just resentment, Edward Hyde had to bring them to the door and pay them in a cheque drawn in the name of Henry Jekyll. This danger was easily eliminated for the future by opening an account at another bank in the name of Edward Hyde himself, and by sloping my own hand backward, I had supplied my double with a signature. I thought I sat beyond the reach of fate. Some 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers, I had been out for one of my adventures, had returned at late hours, and woke the next day in bed with somewhat odd sensations. It was in vain I looked about me, in vain I saw decent furniture and tall proportions of the room in the square, in vain I recognised the pattern of the bed curtains and the design of my mahogany frame. Something still kept insisting that I was not where I was, and that I had not wakened where I seemed to be, but in the little room in Soho where I was accustomed to sleep in the body of Edward Hyde. I smiled to myself, and in my psychological way, began lazily to inquire into the elements of this illusion, occasionally, even as I did so, dropping back into my comfortable morning doze. I was still so engaged when, in one of my more wakeful moments, my eye fell upon the hand of Jekyll. As you have often remarked, it was professional in shape and size. It was large, firm, white, and homely, but the hand which I now saw clearly enough in the yellow light of the mid-London morning, lying half shut in the bedclothes, was lean, powdered, knuckly, of a dusky pallor, and thickly shaded with a smart growth of hair. It was the hand of Edward. I must have stared upon it for nearly half a minute, sunk as I was in the mere stupidity of wonder, before terror woke in the breast as sudden as startling as the crash of cymbals, and bounding from my bed, I rushed to the mirror. At the sight met my eyes, blood was changed into something exquisitely thin and icy. Yes, I had gone to bed Henry Jekyll. I had awakened Edward Hyde. How was this to be explained? I asked myself, and then, with another bound of terror, how was this to be remedied? It was well in the morning. Servants were up, and all my drugs were in the cabinet. A long journey down 2 pairs of stairs, through the back passage across the open court, and through the anatomical theatre, where I was then standing horror-struck. It might indeed be possible to cover my face, but what use was that, when I was unable to conceal my alteration in my stature, and an overpowering sweetness of relief, it came back upon my mind that the servants already used to the coming and going of my second self. I had soon dressed, and as well as I was able, in clothes of my own size, had soon passed through the house, where Bradshaw stared and drew back at seeing Mr. Hyde at such an hour and in such a strange way. 10 minutes later, Dr. Jekyll had returned to his own shape and was sitting down, with darkened brow, to make a feint of breakfasting. Small indeed was my appetite. This inexplicable incident, this reversal of my previous experience, seemed like the Babylonian finger on the wall, to be spelling out the letters of my judgment, and I began to reflect more seriously than ever I had on the issues and possibilities of my double existence. The part of me which I had the power of projecting had lately been much exercised and nourished. It had seemed to me that late as though the body of Edward Hyde had grown in stature, as though, when I wore that form, I were conscious of a more generous tide of blood, and I began to spy a danger that, if this were much prolonged, the balance of my nature might be permanently overthrown. The power of voluntary change be forfeited, the character of Edward Hyde become irrevocably mine. The power of the drug had not always been equally displayed. Once, very early in my career, it had totally failed me. Since then I had been obliged on more than one occasion to double, and once, with infinite risk of death, to treble and the amount. And these rare uncertainties had cast hitherto the sole shadow on my contentment. Now, however, I'm in the light of the morning's accident. In the light of the morning's accident, I was led to remark whereas in the beginning the difficulty had been to throw off the body of Jekyll, it had gradually but decidedly transferred itself to the other side. All things therefore seemed to point to this, that I was slowly losing hold of my original and better self, and becoming slowly incorporated with my second and worse. Between these two, I had now felt I had to choose. My two natures had memory in common, but all the other faculties were mostly unequally shared between them. Jekyll, who was composite, now with the most sensitive apprehension, now with the greedy gusto projected and shared in the pleasure and adventures of Hyde. But Hyde was indifferent to Jekyll, all but remembered him as a mountain bandit. Bandit remembers the cavern in which he conceals himself from pursuit. Jekyll had more than a father's interest. Hyde had more than the son's indifference. To cast in my lot with Jekyll was to die to those appetites which I had long secretly indulged and had late begun to pamper. To cast it with Hyde was to die to 1,000 interests and aspirations, and to become at a blow and forever despised and friendless. The bargain might appear unequal, but there was still another consideration in the scales. While Jekyll would suffer smartingly in the fires of abstinence, Hyde would not even conscious of all that he had lost. Strange as my circumstances were, in terms of this debate I was old and commonplace as man, but as same inducements and alarms cast the die for any tempted and trembling sinner, and it fell out with me, as it falls with so vast a majority of my fellows, that I choose the better part of my found wanting to strengthen to keep it. Yes, I preferred the elderly and discontented doctor, surrounded by friends and cherishing honest hopes, and bade a resolute farewell to the liberty, the comparative youth, the light step, leaping pulse, and secret pleasures that I had enjoyed in the disguise of Hyde. I had this choice perhaps with some unconscious reservation, for I neither gave up the house in Soho, nor destroyed the clothes of Edward Hyde, which still lay ready in my cabinet for 2 months. However, I was true to my determination for 2 months. I led a life of such severity as I had never been attained to, and enjoyed the compensation of an approving conscience, but time began at last to obliterate the freshness of my alarm. The praises of conscience began to grow into a thing of course. I began to be tortured with throes and longings as of Hyde struggling after freedom, and at last in an hour of moral weakness I once again compounded and swallowed it out. I did not suppose that when a drunkard reasoned with himself upon his vice, he is once out of 500 times affected by the dangers that he run through his brutish physical insensibility. Neither had I, long as I had considered my position, made enough allowance for the complete moral insensibility and insensate readiness to evil, which were the leading characters of Edward Hyde. Yet it was these that I was punished. My devil had been long caged, yet it came out roaring, and I was conscious, even when I took the draught, of a more unbridled, a more furious propensity to ill. It must have been this, I suppose, that stirred in my foul that tempest of impatience with which I listened to the civilities of my unhappy victim. I declared, at least, before God, no man morally sane could have been guilty of that crime upon so pitiful provocation, and that I struck in no more reasonable spirit than that in which a sick child may break a plaything. But I had voluntarily stripped myself of all those balancing instincts, by which even the worst of us continues to walk with some degree of steadiness among temptations. In my case to be tempted, however, slight was to fall. Ooh, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. Instantly the spirit of hell woke in me, enraged. With the transport of glee, I mauled the unresisting body, tasting delightful from every blow, and it was not till weariness had begun to succeed that I was suddenly, in the top fit of my delirium, struck through the heart by a cold thrill of terror. And dispersed, I saw my life to be forfeit, and fled from the scene of these excesses. I once glorying and trembling, my lust of evil gratified and stimulated, my love of life screwed to the topmost peg. I ran to the house of Soho, and, to make assurance doubly sure, destroyed my papers. Thence I set out through the lamplit streets, in the same divided ecstasy of mind, gloating on crime, lightheadedly devising others in the future, and yet still hastening and still hearkening in my wake for the steps of Avenger. Hyde had a song in his lips as he compounded the draught, and as he drank it, pledged the dead man. The pangs of transformation had not done tearing him before Henry Jekyll, with streaming tears of gratitude and remorse, had fallen upon his knees and lifted his clasped hands to God. The veil of self-indulgence was rent from the head to foot. I saw my life as a whole. I followed it up from the days of childhood when I had walked with my father's hand, and through the self-denying toils of my professional life, to arrive again and again with the same sense of unreality and the demand of horrors of the evening. I could have screamed aloud. I sought with tears and prayers to smother down the crowd of hideous images and sounds of which my memory swarmed against me, and still between the petitions, the ugly face of my iniquity stared into my soul. As the acuteness of the remorse began to die away, it succeeded by a sense of joy. The problem of my conduct was solved. Hyde was thenceforth impossible. Whether I would or not, I was now confined to the better part of my existence, and oh, how I rejoiced to think it. With what willing humility I embraced anew the restrictions of natural life, and with what sincere renunciation I locked the doors by which I had so often gone and come, and grounded the key under my heel. The next day came the news that the murder had been overlooked, that the guilt of Hyde was patent to the world, and that the victim was a man high in public estimation. It was not only a crime, it had been a tragic folly. I think I was glad to know it. I think I was glad to have my better impulses thus buttressed and guarded by the terrors of the scaffold. Jekyll was now my city of refuge, but Hyde peep out an instant, and the hands of all men would be raised to take and slay him. I resolved in my future conduct to redeem the past, and I can say with honesty that my resolve was fruitful of some good. You know yourself how earnestly in the last months of last years I laboured to relieve sufferings, and now that much was done for others, and that the days were passed quietly, almost happily for myself, nor can I truly say that I wearied of this beneficent and innocent life. I think instead that I daily enjoyed it more and completely, but I was still cursed with my duality of purpose, and as the first edge of my penitence wore off, the lower side of me, the long indulged, so recently chained down, began to growl for license. Not that I dreamed of resuscitating Hyde, the bare idea that I would startle me to frenzy, no. It was in my own person that I was once more tempted to trifle with my conscience, that it was an ordinary secret sinner, and that I was last fell before the assault of temptation. There comes an end to all things. The most captious measure is filled at last. The brief condescension of my evil finally destroyed the balance of my soul. And yet I was not alarmed. The fall seemed natural, like a return to old days before I had made my discovery. It was a fine, clear January day, wet underfoot where the frost had melted, but cloudless overhead, and the Regent's Park was full of winter chirrupings and sweet with spring odours. I sat in the sun on a bench, the animal within me licking the chops of memory, the spiritual side a little drowsed, promising subsequent penitence, but not yet moved to begin. After all, I reflected it was like my neighbours, and then smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill with the lazy cruelty of their neglect, and at the very moment of that vainglorious thought, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea and the most deadly shuddering. These passed away and left me faint, and then in its turn the faintness subsided. I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thought, greater boldness, a contempt of danger, a solution in the bonds of obligation. I looked down, my clothing hung formlessly on my shrunken limbs. The hand that lay on my knee was scored and hairy, was once more Edward Hyde. A moment before I had been safe, all my men's respect, wealthy, beloved, the cloth laying for me in the dining room at home, and now I was common quarry of mankind, hunted, houseless, a known murderer, thrall to gallows. Oh, nearly done. My reasons wavered, but it did not fail me utterly. I have more than once observed that, in my second character, my faculties seemed sharpened to a point and my spirits more tensely elastic. Thus it came about that, where Jekyll perhaps might have succumbed, Hyde rose to the importance of the moment. My drug were in the oppressors of my cabinet. How was I to reach them? It was the problem that, crushing my temples in my hand, I set myself to solve. The laboratory door I had closed. If I sought to enter by my house, my own servants would consign me to the gallows. I saw I must employ another hand, and I thought of Lanyon. How could he to be reached? How persuaded? Supposing that I escaped capture in the streets, how was I to make my way into his presence? And how should I, an unknown and displeasing visitor, prevail on the famous physician to rifle the study of his colleague, Dr. Jekyll? Then I remembered that of my original character. One part remained to me. I could write my own hand, and once I had conceived that kindling spark, the way that must follow became lightened up from end to end. Thereupon I had arranged my clothes as best I could, and summoning a passing hansom, drove to a hotel in Portland Street, the name of which I chanced to remember, and my appearance, which was indeed comical enough, however tragic a fate these garments covered. The driver could not conceal his mirth. I gnashed my teeth upon him, a gust of devilish fury, the smile withered from his face. Happily for him, yet more happily for myself, for in another instant I had certainly dragged him from his perch, and at the inn as I entered, I looked about me, and with so black a countenance as I made attendants tremble, and not a look did they exchange in my presence, but obsequiously took my orders, led me to a private room, and brought me, where with fall to write, Hyde in danger of his life was a creature new to me, shaken with inordinate anger, strung to the pitch of murder, lusting to inflict pain. Yet the creature was astute, mastered his fury with a great effort of the will, composed his own important letters, one to Lanyon and one to Poole, and that he might receive actual evidence of their being posted, sent them out with directions that they should be registered. Thenceforward, he sat all day over the fire in the private room, gnawing his nails. There he dined, sitting along with his fears. The waiter visibly quailed before his eyes, and thence, when the night was fully come, he set forth in the corner of a closed cab, and was driven to and fro about the streets of the city. He, I say, I cannot say. He, I say, I cannot say. I. Yeah, that child of hell had nothing human, nothing lived in him but fear and hatred, and when at last, thinking the driver had begun to grow suspicious, he discharged his cab and ventured on foot, attired in his misfitting clothes and object and marked out of observation, into the midst of the nocturnal passengers. These two base passions raged within him like a tempest. He walked fast, hunted by his fears, chattering to himself, skulking through the less frequented thoroughfares, counting the minutes that still divided him from midnight. Once a woman spoke to him, offering, I think, a box of lights. He smote her to her face, and she fled. He smote her in the face, and she fled. When I came to myself at Lanyon's, the horror of my old friends perhaps affected me somewhat. I don't know. It was at least but a drop in the sea to abhorrence with which I looked back upon these hours. A change had come over me. It was no longer fear of the gallows, it was the horror of being Hyde that racked me. I received Lanyon's condemnation partly in a dream. It was partly in a dream that I came home to my own house and I got into bed. I slept after the prostration of the day, the stringent and profound slumber which not even the nightmares of that wrong maid could avail to break. I awoke in the morning, shaken, weakened, but refreshed. I still hated and feared the thought of the brute that slept within me, and I had not of course forgotten the appalling dangers of that day before, but I was once more at home, in my own house and close to my drugs, and gratitude for my escape shone so strong in my soul that it almost rivaled the brightness of hope. I was stepping leisurely across the court after breakfast, drinking the chill of the air with pleasure, and I was seized again with those indescribable sensations that heralded the change, and I had but the time to gain the shelter of my cabinet before I was once again raging and freezing with the passion of Hyde. It took on this occasion a double dose to recall me to myself, and alas, 6 hours after, I sat looking sadly in the fire. The pangs returned, and the drug had to be re-administered. In short, from the day forth, it seemed only to be great effort as of gymnastics, and only in the immediate stimulation of the drug, that I was able to wear the countenance of Jekyll. At all hours of the day and night, I would be taken with the premonitory shudder. Above all, if I slept or even dozed off a moment in my chair, it was always as Hyde that I awakened. Under the strain of this continually impending doom, and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemned myself, even beyond what I had thought was possible to man, I became my own person, a creature eaten up and emptied by fever, languidly, and weak both in both and mind, and solely occupied by one thought, the horror of my other self. But when I slept, or when the virtue of the medicine wore off, I would leap almost without transition, and the pangs of transformation grew daily less marked, into the possession of a fancy brimming and image of terror, the soul boiling with causeless hatred, and a body that seemed not strong enough to contain the raging energies of life. Powers of Hyde seemed to have grown with the sickliness of Jekyll, and certainly with the hate now divided them was equal in each side. With Jekyll it was a thing of vital instinct. He had now seen a full deformity of the creature that shared with him some of the phenomena of consciousness, and was co-heir to him to death. And beyond these links of community, which in themselves made the most poignant parts of his distress, he thought of Hyde for all of his energy of life, as of something not only hellish but inorganic. This was a shocking thing, that the slime of the pit seemed to utter cries and voices that amorphous dust gesticulated and sinned, and what was dead had no shape, would usurp the offices of life. And this again, that was insurgent of horror, knit to him closer than a wife, closer than an eye, lay occasion his flesh, where he heard it mutter and fled its struggle to be born. And at every hour of weakness, and the confidence of slumber prevailed against him, and deposed him out of life. The hatred of Hyde for Jekyll was more of a different order. His terror of the gallows drove him continually to commit temporary suicide, and return to his subordinate station of a part instead of a person. But he loathed the necessity, he loathed the despondency into which Jekyll was now fallen, and he resented the dislike with which he was himself regarded. Hence the ape-like tricks that he would play me, scrawling my own hand blasphemies in the page of my books, burning the letters and destroying the portrait of my father. And indeed, had it not been for it involved me in the ruin, but his love of life is wonderful. I go further, I who sicken and freeze at the mere thought of him, when I recall the objection and passion of his attachment, and when I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide, I find it in my heart to pity him. It is useless, and time awfully fails me. Along his description, no one has ever suffered him torments that suffice, and yet even to these the habits brought no but alleviation, but a certain callousness of soul, certain acquiescence. I'm not even going to attempt that, honestly, of despair, and punishment might have gone on for years. The last calamity which has now fallen, and which has finally severed me from my own face of nature. My provision of salt, which had never been renewed since the date of the first experiment, had begun to run low. I sent out for a fresh supply, and mixed the draught. The evolution followed in the first change of colour, not the second. I drank it, and it was without efficiency. You will learn from Poole how I have had London ransacked. It was in vain, and I am now persuaded by my first supply was impure, and that it was that unknown impurity which lent efficacy to the draught. And about a week had passed, and I am now finishing this statement under the influence of the last of the old powders. This then is the last time, short of the miracle, that Henry Jekyll can think his own thoughts or see his own face. Now how sadly altered in the glass. Nor must I delay too long to bring my writing to an end, for if my narrative has hitherto escaped destruction, it has been by a combination of great prudence and great good luck. Should the throes of change take me to the act of writing it, I will tear it in pieces. But if some time shall have elapsed after I have laid it by, his wonderful selfishness and circumscription to the moment to the moments will probably save it once again from the action of his ape-like spite, and indeed the doom that is closing on us both has already changed and crushed him. Half an hour from now, when I shall again and forever re-endue that hated personality, I know how I shall sit shuddering and weeping in my chair, or continue with the most strained and fear-struck ecstasy of listening, to pace up and down this room, my last earthly refuge, and give ear to every sound of menace. Will Hyde die upon the scaffold, or will he find the courage to release himself at the last moment? God knows. I am careless. This is my true hour of death. And what is to follow concerns another than myself. Here then, as I lay down the pen and proceed to seal up my confession, I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end. And that is the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's it. End of the story. How long does that take to read? 3 hours! 3 hours! I thought that would only take 2 hours, but the last few paragraphs were pretty huge. My voice is gone. Whew. It is currently about 10:30. Because I googled right before this, like, how long would this book to take, because I was thinking about either streaming tonight, or if it took too long, stream tomorrow. But by the time I was already halfway through, I was like, wait, because I thought about it during my break, and I was like, do I really want to finish a book 5 chapters in? It's a novella. It's supposed to be a short book. I might as well just, like, brute force carry it on. But I'm not a big reader, but this is genuinely one of my favourite books, like, of all time. And I will admit that I've only found it, I'm only reading it because of school, because I've got to do it for my exams, but I need to get a move on with my revision, so I'm considering this revision, because while I was reading that, I wouldn't have put it down, because I just wanted to get, through the book, but I could definitely find a few quotes, like, if I was to go back through it, which I probably will, just off stream, to annotate, find a few, because I've already got a few sticky notes in here already, just to, like, pointers in the book that I want to bring up in an exam. Different quotes that I want to use, different themes that are presented, different, semantic fields. I noticed in the very final chapter that we've just read there was a very strong, like, semantic field of, like, passion. Like, he kept on saying, like, a lusting for this, that, and the other, like, an oxymoron, like a... Oh, I can't remember what he said. Again, I'll go back through it eventually to, like, revise it further. But I was not expecting that to take 3 hours. I googled it beforehand and it said it takes, on average, about 1 hour and 50 minutes to read. Unless if I've completely read the article wrong, it was actually said, like, 2 hours, 50 minutes. I'll Google it now, just to make sure. How long does it take to... Oh, that's not how you write that. Yeah, 1 hour 52 minutes. But I did anticipate that it would take me a bit longer purely because I am reading it out loud. So obviously, you're fully enunciating the words, and then there was like my little break in the middle, which is only a couple minutes anyway. There was like my little intro at the start, which was also not that long. I was not expecting it to take 3 hours, however. I anticipated it would take about 2 hours 10 minutes maximum to account for the fact that I was saying it out loud rather than reading it in my head. Did not think that it would add that much to the time. But I adore this book, and I talk about it on stream all the time, so hopefully you can all see right now why I adore this book. It's so interesting, because what we do about themes of duality, secrecy, yada yada, and yeah, I think in class, when we were reading it, I'd either like space out or like doze off a little bit, and then I was off for like a day or two, I think, because I was quite ill once, and I missed like half the book, because it is a novella, which basically means it's short, right? I finished this in 3 hours. It's a short, it would have taken us about 2 hours had I not, like, spoken it aloud. This is a short book. Like, it's only got 10 chapters, and some of the chapters are, like, dead short. Like, as you might have seen on the screen, some of the chapters only took up the space of, like, one screen, so I didn't have to scroll at all, and then some of them, like the 10th chapter, were a lot longer. But, oh my god, I love it. I absolutely adore this book. And I'll go back through, again, like I said, I'll go back through it a lot later on stream just annotating all the things that I want to say about, because I already have a lot of things that I want to talk about in my exams that I'm thinking about right now, because I want to do good, because I know I can do good, but I really flunked my exams this time because I didn't revise in the way that I should be doing, and it is March, and my exams start in May, like, around about the middle to end of May, but May nonetheless, so I need to get a move on with my revision. I do. I need to get off my arse and actually do some work, because I always say that I'm working, and I always do, like, the slightest bit amount and then just, like, doze off for a bit, because I'm lazy. So, I would like to consider this revision. Reading the entire book in my spare time to, like, go over... Because there were parts of that book that I already, like, knew about. There was, like, a section where, Utterson's talking to Hyde at the doorway. He makes a joke about, like, if he shall be Mr. Hyde, then I am Mr. Seek, like, that bit. We did that in class literally earlier today, like, that extract, just to, like, find quote about, like, write about sort of thing. We did that today. Then, there's the bit at, like, the very start of chapter 10, well, not very start, but, like, near the start of chapter 10, how he's, like, how he talks about, like, awakening Hyde has, like, opened, like, a gate to hell, like, that sort of thing, or, like, released the devil. We did that not long ago, too. So there were parts of the story that also, the trampling of the girl, we probably did that in class about 100 times, because it's considered, like, a very key part of the story, where he shows violence towards another human for the first time. And then the second time, obviously, is a very key part in the story, when he kills the MP, and then he has to, like, pretty much go into hide, which, like, inevitably leads to his death. So there were parts in the book that I already, like, fully knew about. And then I think there was some that I definitely needed a bit of a refresher on, because it is complicated, right? It does use a lot of words I don't fully understand, but I suppose you don't really need to fully understand the words, as long as you, like, get the general context behind the words. And I suppose I could do with a little bit of research into some of the words, but then obviously there's, like, a little bit of, like, older English, like, here too, or, like, that's not a word that you'd use nowadays, so obviously I'm not exactly expected to know that, but I could probably assume that that probably means something a lot, like, loosely related to the word therefore, like, that sort of thing. But yeah, I need to get my move on with my revision, because in some subjects I went up in a grade, because I did exams in November and I just did them in February, and for the ones comparing the two, some of them I went up in February, but then some of them I went down. And I'm not happy about the ones that I went down in, because they're very easy and I just made really stupid mistakes. And then I'm happy with the ones that I went up in, don't get me wrong, but I know I can do better than that. I know I can. So I want to. So, like I said earlier, I'm going to get off my arse and actually do some good revision. Because I want to do well. I do. And... this... God. Exactly 6 months from now, I will be in 6th form. Because exactly 6 months from now will be the 11th of September, and by that point I will most likely be in 6th form, because that's usually when, like, school starts. And that is insane to me. Because it does not feel like I've got 6 months until exams or anything. I've got about 2 months until exams, because they start at the end of May. And we've been told by all of our teachers that it'll absolutely fly by. And honestly, year 11 has flown by. Every other year in the school has absolutely bloody dragged. And that's taking into account the fact that I missed the second half of year 9. I missed 3 months of year 10 from, like, January to March. Like, that weird lockdown thing. Like, the 4 years I've spent in secondary school have absolutely dragged. But this year has gone quick. And honestly, I'm really happy that it's gone quick. I just want it over and done with. Nobody actually likes secondary school, realistically. It is bad, it is hell. People are weird. And I just want to get a 6th form. But I want to get there the good way, right? Because I know that, technically, if I got all the grades that I got in a regular GCSE now, I would have all the grades I needed to get in a 6th form. Like, I think I need, like, a handful of 5s and a handful of 6s. I would have all of them, don't get me wrong. But I can do better than that. I can. Because I know I'm better than... Because don't get me wrong, 5s and 6s is great, right? It's amazing. It's like, a 4 is a pass, a 5 is a strong pass. Anything above a 5 is great, honestly. But I know I can do better than that. I know I can, but I don't try hard enough. And if I did try hard enough, then I absolutely could do better than that. So I want to do better than that. My god, the dramatic music in the background is making this seem a lot more serious than it actually is. To be fair, it just feels a little bit jarring to start playing Lemon Demon now. Because obviously I'll do it for, like, the little, like, outro minute. Obviously. I might. I'll think about it. But yeah, this has been amazing. I'm actually very proud of myself that I did this. I'm happy that I did. Because if I was to read this on my own, I think I would have clocked out by chapter 3. Because you might have seen us, like, sighing at some point. That's not me getting tired. I mean, I'm sorry. That's not me getting bored. That is me getting tired. Like, you might have seen that, like, during, like, chapter 10, I pretty much sighed after every chapter, because every chapter was quite long. It wasn't because I was very bored of the book. I adore this book. It's just the sheer fact that I started getting a little bit, like, tired. Like, my eyes are a little bit sore now, because, like, a bit of strain. You know the kind of pain that you get from your headset being on your ears for too long. I'm starting to get that, so I can't hear the music at the moment because I've just taken off my headset. My throat is gone. I think I've been talking about that the whole stream, honestly. Like, if I was to read this by myself, I wouldn't have the throat issue, probably wouldn't have the headphone issue because I'd just listen to my speakers, but I probably would have just given up quite easily. So, I think I probably will do a lot more revision on streams, because I noticed in year 10, when, I don't think the streams on my VODs channel, I don't think you can find them anywhere, but if you were still around back then, this was in, like, last May, June sort of time, I did, like, these I think I had a stream that was literally 7 hours long of me revision, little bit of break, revision break, revision break, and it was actually really good, because by this point I was, like, quite new. I would still consider myself new to streaming, but this was, like, right as I started streaming, like, a few months after. And streaming gave me this, like, unacquainted energy that, like, I couldn't match anywhere else. Therefore, streaming myself revision would give me enough energy to revise for 7 hours straight, longer than a school day. Like, obviously, I don't really get that, like, boost of energy anymore, because not because I don't like streaming, just because I'm more used to it now. Therefore, it's not, like, a huge deal, me going live, like, you know. Like, you might notice at the very, very start of a stream how I've got a bit of energy, like, me introduction and all that. But that's just because it's an introduction just for hype. But I didn't really care about hyping up this stream in particular, because I didn't think it was going to be a very hype stream. Whereas if it was, like, Valorant, then it probably should be, because it's, like, ooh, big action game sort of thing. But, yeah. I should probably revise more on the stream, because I've noticed that's probably, like, my way of giving myself enough energy to do, because I don't want to, like, disappoint people. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of people, like, revising for, like, 5 minutes and be like, oh, I can't be arsed, I'll just sit on TikTok for, like, an hour, because I'm not going to do that on stream, realistically. Therefore, I probably should revise more on stream. Obviously, I'm not going to right now, because it's 20 or 11. I should probably be ending up soon, but I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this quite a lot. I want to do more of this. I want to do it. I want to do work on stream. I think that's I think that's my go-to method. I think that's what I'm gonna do. Because I did notice I did quite well in my year 10 mocks. I never actually got my results for my year 10 mocks. Everyone went into, like, isolation right at the very end of year 10 because people kept on getting, you know. So, like, I never ended up actually getting my results. But for the subjects that I knew that I got told that I did well in, I noticed that didn't really, because I did get, like, a couple results for a couple subjects, but I didn't get them for all of them. But I knew I did very well in some subjects that I just haven't been able to match since, and I think that's purely because I did the most revision then. But then I didn't really do a whole lot for November mocks, so I was like, oh, it's, you know, it's the very start of year 11, it doesn't really matter. And suddenly it was February. Like, it genuinely felt about 5 minutes away from February. I felt like I had zero time to revise, when actually I did have time, I was just being lazy. So, I'm gonna try and get my head down. I hate to say this again, even though you haven't seen this for a long time, but you probably might not see me for a long time again. Purely because I want to do work, and if I do come back, I probably will be doing work. Because I feel like nowadays, I just feel guilty not doing it, because I know I need to get my head down. And obviously, I need time to rest, everyone does, I'm a human being. I need to find a way to combine my passions and my work for me to be able to, you know, be a bit productive, sort of thing. And then once all work's over, once all GCSE are over, although that's probably going to be months from now, you'll never have to hear about me exams ever again, it can just be chill again. But until then, I think the next few months, most streams are going to be either me doing work, or me streaming, like, very short, either doing work, very short streams, or on the off chance that I've got no ideas but I want to stream and relax, I'll probably play Valorant. Realistically, you know what I'm like. But yeah, this has been a very good stream. Oh, I'm gonna hop in the shower and I'm gonna go to bed. I think I need it. But my god. If you're wondering in my I'm not sure if I think I mentioned this, but in my little like break in like midstream, I had some honey. Doc, hello, unknown. You've caught us at an awkward time. I'm literally just. How have I been? I've been great, honestly. You've caught us at an awkward time. I'm literally just about to end up. It's been so long. It has. I've just been talking about it for about 10 minutes. But if you're curious about what we've been doing, I read the entirety of, like, in whole, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Straight up. I just have. Your ending, I know. But I've just given, like, a big speech for, like, the last 10 minutes about, like, the plans for the future, what I've been doing, like, that sort of thing. So, the VODs exist for 2 weeks after the stream goes up. The VODs channel exists for a reason. If you want to watch that, watch my little explanation, go right ahead. But, yeah. If you want to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, that is @Herbia for all of them. If you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel for one, I promise I will upload eventually, as I've said for the 1000th time. Go !socials, which will bring you to a beacons link, which is like a link tree, but it looks cooler. Which will then lead you to my YouTube channel, my VODs channel, so you can watch the stream later, and the Discord server, which you can also reach at !Discord, if you would like to join that. I'll usually respond on that if you message on it. And you can get notifications on streams for there if the Twitch ones don't really do it for you anymore, because you get, yeah, thank you, unknown. If the Twitch notifications just get a little bit like blended in with all the other ones. And yeah, if you want any updates from me, they're also on the Discord. That's about it from me. If you want to subscribe, !sub rewards, you can get exclusive sub badges, which I'm quite proud of actually. You get access to 3 sub emotes by the lovely Mothacua on Instagram, and I think that's like just about it where you get from. Oh, sub exclusive Discord actually. I've missed that actually. I miss updating that, but there's no point in me updating it now because I don't have any subs. But yeah, you get access to the sub exclusive Discord category with an ! On the Docturbia's Den on ! Discord, which if you connect your Discord to your Twitch account, you should be able to see that if you subscribe, which then you get sub exclusive what's it called, channels, a suggestions channel, and what I like to call B-Tech Twitter and sleep deprived B-Tech Twitter, which are like little updates from me from throughout the day, if that's what you like listen to, like watching. But that's it from me. I'm gonna just leave the little piano music for the outro because I think it's nice. I haven't had my head. Man, I wish I was still in the sub updates. That was nice. Yeah, it was. I actually did really like updating that. Hey man, if you want access to them again, if you have Amazon Prime, you know what to do. I don't need to tell you what to do. You know what to do. But yeah, I'm gonna turn up the music a bit, and I'll see you later. I hope you all have a good night or good day, depending on where you are in the world. I'm gonna have a good night. Adios.